This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
It is 3 minutes after 10. It's actually vomit-inducing, isn't it? The latest development in that hideous story of the Israeli hostages is Hamas claiming that Shiri Babas's remains are mixed with those of others, given the nature of the circumstances in which she died. I'm really sorry to open the show with that, but I think it's important also to remind you that the relevant head of the UN in the area has described the celebrations that accompanied the return of those bodies as abhorrent, quite correctly. But if anything changes with regard to that story in the course of this programme, I will bring it to your attention immediately. And listen, I spare me all the texts asking me why I'm not talking about all the dead Palestinian children, all right? It's just the nature of how the news works. Today, that is the biggest story in the region, whether you approve of that metric or not. And that is why, as a story is developing and or breaking, it garners more attention inevitably from the outside world than the, if you like, the attritional slaughter that has been perpetrated in Gaza now for, an extremely long time. But we are not concerning ourselves with that first and foremost this morning. We're concerning ourselves with matters rather closer to home. How do you do this, do you think? How do you do this? How interested are you? This isn't the phone-in. How interested are you in defence spending? See? Not very is the answer. Unless, of course, you are in the military. You never ever... One of the great truths of life... Was it Mark Twain who said death and taxes? Well, there is another, Benjamin Franklin, I forget, but there is another one, and that is that military leaders will explain that they need more money. It's as certain as the sun coming up in the morning. It's as sure as night following day. Here's a senior general. Here's somebody saying that we need more defence spending. And of course, the danger of that is the boy who cried wolf scenario, isn't it? It's they're always wanging on about how they need more defence spending, that when they really, really need more defence spending, we are minded perhaps not to pay as much attention as we should. I've been very impressed this week by Ben Wallace. He was by far the best performer in the last Conservative government, wasn't he? And he continues to be a very articulate and impressive politician. He was on with Nick Ferrari earlier this week, and he writes today in the Daily Telegraph a rare outbreak of common sense on the comment pages of the Daily Telegraph. But his warnings are in danger of being ignored. 3% of GDP. Do you even know what that means? Off the top of your head, do you know what that means? No, you probably don't. Starmer under pressure to raise defence spending to 3%, and you don't know. I don't know what that means. Not in the great scheme of things. What would we have to cut? Where would the money come from? What would we have to do? How effective would it be? Usually when we talk about increased spending in the NHS, someone will pop up to say all the money gets wasted on management, which is untrue. But there might be a kernel of truth in questions about the procurement practices of the British military. All of this seems pertinent. It wasn't by accident, that I began my pontifications this week by reminding you of the historian Francis Fukuyama's contention in, I think, 1989, that history was over. That the tension between, if you like, extremist ideology and liberal democracy had ended because the Cold War had finished and the Berlin Wall had come down. What a week it's been for discussing such matters in the moment, because by Wednesday lunchtime, we were wondering whether actually Vladimir Putin had won the Second Cold War without us actually realising that it was even underway. Having a president of the United States of America in your pocket, as he clearly and categorically does, was probably something that you couldn't even imagine happening when Ronald Reagan was president of the United States of America. And I forgot to tell you yesterday, a lot of Reagan-era politicians, almost all of the ones that are still around, have come forward to utterly condemn the actions of the current Republican president of the United States of America. An extraordinary situation, but worth mentioning, because I forgot to mention it yesterday. But that idea that history is over is contingent, is absolutely intrinsic to the idea that we don't really need an army anymore, or that military spending isn't really that important. I've been doing this job now for 20 years, give or take, right? I've got my first entry for Idiot's Corner. Carl says cut foreign aid. Great idea, mate. Yes, so sending money to places like Ukraine would be an absolutely wonderful way to improve the capabilities of our military that may have to soon to go to Ukraine. Honestly, just stay away from scissors today, Carl, promise me. So the idea 20 years ago, I mean, you still had the shadow of the Falklands in the back of your mind. It was an extraordinary moment in British history, the Falklands. I was staying with my godparents at the time, and my godfather had a map. He'd got a map out of one of the newspapers. He was a News of the World man, so it'd probably come out of the Sun. He'd got a map of one of the newspapers, and at breakfast we'd track the passage of the task force as it made its way from Plymouth to the South Atlantic, and you sort of got caught up in a what the word is, almost a warlike mentality, and that real rule Britannia rules the waves. It feels like a different era in a sense, but it was such an egregious invasion of sovereign territory that nobody doubted the rectitude of Margaret Thatcher's government's response to the invasion of the Falkland Islands by General Galtieri's Argentinian army. It was an invasion of sovereign territory, actually, for the record, every single bit as egregious as Vladimir Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine. I wonder if Donald Trump, if he'd been around at the time or he'd been politically active, would have accused Margaret Thatcher of starting the Falklands conflict, which is, I think, morally and logically equivalent to his claims that Volodymyr Zelensky is somehow responsible for starting the invasion of his own country by Vladimir Putin's Russia. So I don't know. You know, General Sir Richard Sheriff, who is a former second in command in Europe of NATO, has called for much more spending. I mean, pretty much everybody has called for more spending. All that's changed in the last 24 hours is Rachel Reeves indicating that military and defence spending will rise sooner rather than later, and hinting very strongly that this will happen even if it requires cuts to other parts of the public sector. And this is also the really, what's the word I want? One of the most insidious things about Trump, of course, is that if there is the tiniest kernel of accuracy in something that he says, people use it to excuse all of the lies and propaganda. So European countries, particularly the UK probably, should have been spending more on defence, should have been spending more on our own army and its capabilities overseas. And that is true. We've had a post-war settlement during which the United States wanted to be by far the biggest player on this stage. The formation of NATO has to be viewed as an essentially American project. It's designed to keep peace in Europe and to keep Germany subdued, although that feels a little bit out of date now. The idea that this is a sort of a confidence trick or a scam that has been played on the United States by Europe is absolutely for the birds. But that tiny little, did I say Plymouth instead of Portsmouth? There's always someone. Thank you to Terry, who's in Bournemouth. We've got all the myths, all the mouths this morning. Plymouth, Portsmouth and Bournemouth. All we need is Exmouth and we'd have a full set. So you have this kernel of truth that we should be spending more on defence and that the United States spends a lot. He's lied about that as well. They haven't spent more in Ukraine than the combined forces of Europe. But the idea that we should be spending more is true, I think. The threat is obviously real. You hear the way that Bill Browder spoke on this program yesterday about the attitudes to Russia that are held by the citizens of countries like Estonia and Lithuania, and that phrase that he said that resonated through the studio about that their ancestors were rounded up and sent to Siberia by the precursor of the current Russia, by Stalin's Soviet Union. They know what imperial rapaciousness looks like. They know what illegal invasion feels like. They know what occupation tastes like because they have it in their generational memory. And I don't think we feel that here. If you could see Russia from here, then a politician explaining that we need to spend more on military spending would probably get a much easier ride, a much easier listen. Don't forget also that the radicalised online right, the politics of conspiracism, is now in charge of the world. And an awful lot of that conspiracy and lies is Kremlin-sponsored. So you've got people sitting next to you in McDonald's who honestly believe that Zelensky is the baddie in this piece. You've got people like Elon Musk and Donald Trump standing up in public and trying to portray Vladimir Putin as the good guy or the person with whom the West should be doing business. business. You have to hang on to the truth. You have to hang on to the truth. But goodness me, it's hard sometimes, isn't it? When you've got such powerful forces, such powerful voices, peddling outright lies and pro-Kremlin propaganda. If you were living in a country from which you could see Russia, you'd probably be less susceptible to it. But Romania, during their presidential elections last year, fell for a lot of it. So nothing is certain. Nothing is sacred. But what is our army actually like? Do we have enough people listening? I suspect some of you might be still under the auspices of the Official Secrets Act. For the record, and this is true every day on the programme, although it's probably more relevant on some days than others, I don't want anyone to ring in and break the Official Secrets Act. Is that okay? Are we cool on that? I think that would be suboptimal if we start breaking the Official Secrets. I'm scared enough of Ofcom without having to worry about the Official Secrets Act. So let's not flirt with any breaches of the Official Secrets Act, okay? Let's ask, however, in that space, what would it actually mean? So for non-military people, the question in a way is, how do you persuade the population that we need to spend more on the army? 0345, on the armed forces, sorry, to my RAF and Navy friends. 0345 6060 973. Given that you can't see the threat, given that we're living in a world where our historical allies and defenders have become pro-Kremlin mouthpieces, how do you persuade the British population that we need to spend more on military? But for military people listening, what I'd like to know is what it means. What is the current state of the army in which you are serving or have served? How fit for purpose is it? Are we? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. How fit for purpose is the armed force in which you serve? And I'll take 1 degree of separation, okay? So I don't even know what that means. Simon in Guernsey reminds us we've only got about 70,000 troops. I don't even know what that means. I can count. I'm not completely flipping stupid. But I don't even know what that means in the context of what we can and couldn't do, what we could or couldn't do tomorrow. If the flag went up, if the siren went off, you hear talk of putting 30,000 troops on the ground in Ukraine, and if you're talking about British troops and you have 70,000 in total, that's half our army gone in a heartbeat. What if something else happened? What if the firemen went on strike? I'm kind of joking with the second bit, but you take my point. How thinly spread would we be in the event of a proper engagement? I kind of find myself wondering, and I don't know if anyone else can answer this question, would we be able to cope with another invasion of the Falkland Islands? A bloke in charge in Argentina is a complete headbanger. He just gave Elon Musk a chainsaw live on stage in America. I can't believe I just said those words out loud. That's the world we're living in now. But would we be capable? Would our Navy, would our Army be capable of repelling an invasion of the Falkland Islands today in the way that it was in the early 80s? I genuinely don't know. So if you are in the military, what's it like? 0345 6060 973. And I don't want it to sound like I'm dismissive of the idea that we shouldn't spend more money on military spending. You know, under the last leader of the Labour Party, there was a sort of uptick in evidence-free and often pro-Russia bogus pacifism, wasn't there? The idea that you shouldn't get involved in any wars at all. You should let rapacious illegal invasions go unchallenged. So there must be a slightly more intellectually coherent version of that. I always feel that some of the bravest people in the First World War were the conscientious objectors. Not so much the Second World War, because the threat of Nazism was pretty clear. But in the First World War, for people to say, I'm not going to go and kill some random German just because a couple of cousins who happen to be a king and a Kaiser have kind of fallen out with each other. And then your life was over. You'd be pilloried and abused and sent white feathers and all of it. I'm fascinated by that period of English or British history. But it's not really pertinent to the conversation that we're having today. What would it take, do you think, for us to realise, to just nod back in the last show of the week to the words or the historian with which I opened the first show of the week, that Francis Fukuyama has been proved categorically and completely, and if you're all here for the alliteration, let's chuck in a comprehensively as well, categorically, completely and comprehensively wrong. Cold War isn't over. We're smack in the middle of 2.0. And it's not even that cold anymore. It's hot. It's a hot war in Ukraine. And as we discussed yesterday, the possibility of it spreading is a very real and present danger. You grew up, didn't you, in a world, depending on how old you are, where you couldn't quite conceive of going to war in Europe. Going to war in Europe. You think of wars, you either think of the Falklands or you think of the Middle East. I suppose Yugoslavia sort of straddles geographically that concept, but not in the context of Axis powers and the Allies. It seemed to be completely different. But here we are. So, what is the state of the Middle? How fit for purpose are we? 0345 6060 973. And what is the thing, you personally, as a taxpayer, someone who's already probably struggling to a degree with the cost of living, whatever the personal situation is, how would you respond? How do you buy? How do you feel about the suggestion that we as a country need to be spending quite a lot more on defence than we currently are? Hit the numbers now. You will get through. It's a weird one, this. It's not, I can't imagine there's going to be much of a ding-dong, but I'm particularly keen to speak to people who've got some insights, albeit, I don't know how high up in the army you'd have to be to have a really clear-eyed view of this. But I am interested also in the kind of low-level detail. James, the idea that we could make a massive difference in Ukraine, I haven't even got boots that fit. Do you see what I mean? I hope that's not the case, but when we talk about the NHS, we often do find ourselves a little bit shocked by the daily reality of working in it. And that is it. What is the daily reality of working in the British Armed Forces? It's 19 minutes after 10.
James O'Brien on LBC.
2 minutes after 10 is the time. And how is our army? It seems an odd question to ask, but I suspect that more than at any other point in your lifetime, that the idea of war in Europe is plausible, is real, and therefore what role we could or would play is a really important question to ask. Rich is in Dudley, right? I'm an ex-squaddy, 2 Afghan tours. The state of our army is this, James. When I joined, we were fighting 2 concurrent wars effectively, one in Iraq and one in Afghanistan. The army has now been hollowed out by successive conservative governments to within an inch of its life. The operational effectiveness of the army I knew has gone. It can be recovered, but it will take years and a hell of a lot of money. And I'm a serving member of the Royal Navy, James, writes Hoggers, and one of the things we need to do is stop following American trends. The all-nuclear submarine service, for example, is expensive and unfit for purpose. Most of what we do could be achieved much more effectively by modern diesel electrics, not to mention the amount of officers we have in the senior ranks that are completely superfluous. And he specifies he's talking about Commodore, Brigadier and above. I don't know. But you do. I mean, you're there, and that's what I'm asking, people who know what they're talking about. And then for those of us without any military connections, how do we feel about being asked to spend more money? Where on earth would it come from? Peter is in Hornchurch. Peter, what would you like to say?
Yes, good morning. Essentially, we can't cut the public services anymore at all.
No, I don't think we can.
We have to put up income tax, and I think people would realise that it's got to be done. Be careful how you do it. I don't say everyone. There has to be a threshold, at which point people below that threshold don't get an increase, and those above it do. But we can't cut the public services any further. I was in the hospital a few weeks ago, and I spent 3 days in a corridor before they got me onto a ward. And believe me, talk in terms of third world, it's absolutely horrendous. We can't possibly cut the public services any further.
Well, people will think there's always something we can cut. I've already had one plonker suggesting foreign aid. We can find some money down the back of the sofa. What everyone should do, really, before they continue listening to this programme is look at that pie chart that you can find on the HMRC website that shows you exactly where your tax money goes and exactly what it's spent on. It's almost impossible to look at that and disagree with Peter. The idea that you'd reduce any spending in any of those areas and look at where the actual money goes and what the sums are actually like is quite a sobering moment. But I guess, taking Rich in Dudley's point, that the squaddy with 2 Afghan tours under his belt, about the hollowing out of the military by successive Conservative governments, that is a conscious political choice because putting up taxes is seen as so toxic, Peter. And what you're suggesting is that it somehow shouldn't be and wouldn't be in the current context.
That's right.
If they said it straight, we're putting a penny on income tax for the army.
Yes, I would put the caveat in. I do want to see those who genuinely can't afford to pay it left out.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, I don't know whether Rachel Reeves can. I mean, it would involve a direct U-turn on manifesto pledges about tax rises. But I suppose, as ever, with the politics of pragmatism, you say the world has changed. When we made that promise, we didn't think that the President of the United States of America was going to start essentially shilling for the Kremlin. Now that the President of the United States is shilling for Vladimir Putin, our priorities have shifted, and I can't keep that promise not to put taxes up. I don't know. Rob is in Lewisham. Rob, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
So I'm a member of the RN.
Okay.
For me, it's the personnel. We've got recruiting less than what's leaving.
Yes. I don't know. Is your phone line a bit funny? You're not contacting me via an on-ship radio, are you?
No.
Okay, I don't know whether you're just someone who pauses a lot, like a Harold Pinter character, or whether your phone line is a little bit creaky. So we'll find out. We'll continue the conversation with the caveat in place. So what we're describing is a recruitment crisis. So it doesn't matter how much money you move to the military, if they're not signing people up, then it's not going to make any difference.
Exactly. Because with the qualifications we get some really good qualifications now because we get our MVQ level 3s, level 4s, etc.
Yeah,
it's a case of good qualification. I can do better outside. I could do better outside.
An ageing population, students extending their time in education, the rise in obesity, the legacy of Afghanistan, a reduced military footprint in society. And as you've just alluded to, record employment levels, which provide plenty of other opportunities, all drive down not just the number of recruits, but certainly in the final case, the number of people staying for longer. So we're looking at 23, 24, and you're looking at a growing shortfall in recruitment numbers for the UK Armed Forces. I mean, that might be the phone-in we do next. How on earth do you persuade more young people to join the Armed Forces? And I'd like you to try to answer that question if you can, Rob.
I wish I could.
Not good enough. Not good enough, Rob.
That sounds familiar.
Yes.
But the issue also is that I know people that have just done 2 back-to-back deployments with only a 5-month gap in the middle. They spent the last 12 months of 18 deployed. And
that is suboptimal for everybody involved. So, I mean, I mean, in fact, in a way, having this conversation without addressing the recruitment crisis, I'm glad you got on quite early, is a relatively pointless exercise. So let's throw that into the mix as well. I don't know what people like Ben Wallace and General Sir Richard Sheriff have to say about that, because I've not seen them actually address it. We need to spend more on military spending, but we've got a recruitment crisis in the ranks, in the Royal Navy, in the Army, and presumably in the Royal Air Force as well. It's coming up to 29 minutes after 10. There's quite a lot to get through on the show today. I'm going to be joined by a representative of the splendid organisation Full Fact to look at a story that not only will make your hair stand on end at the appalling dereliction of duty by many corners of the UK media, but it also represents the most magnificent marriage of woke watch with misinformation. The 2 features on the programme that both have their own stings eventually in one case. So what would happen? What is a story which would see woke watch and misinformation essentially breeding together to create a story? Full Fact will be joining us a little later to talk about that. Before that, the Financial Times have undertaken an extraordinary investigation into suspected war crimes being committed by Russian forces on Ukrainian prisoners of war. We'll be joined by one of the journalists that's undertaken this investigation. And I'll warn you now, it's not pretty listening, especially in the context of Donald Trump essentially deciding to side with the side accused of the war crimes. And conversation I'm thinking of having a little later in the programme is going to look at this poor soldier, Jaisley Beck. It's another conversation about the army, but I think it's more about fixation, harassment and sexual abuse. So please don't think that I haven't registered the importance of that story as well. It's 10:30. Lottie Morley's here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
33. Sometimes you contact me in ways that distill the story we're discussing down to its very essence. And this is a really good example. One message from Dave, one from Adam. Dave writes, anyone going into a general election with a promise to increase income tax would simply not get elected these days. Too many voters live in a dreamland. And this from Adam. During the Second World War, the rich were taxed at 95%. At this time in world history, it would be a good use of their excessive hoarded money to be deployed. Yes. So there it is. I mean, those are two absolutely conflicting contentions, and yet both accurate, I suspect. Wow. Getting a lot of messages like the ones I read out earlier, like Rich's, a lot of people with a lot of years of service on the clock, all describing similar problems. Barney joined in 99, still serving, and talks about a lack of mass. Technology was meant, not going to church, mass, as in heft, as in equipment and personnel. Technology was meant to be the future of warfare, but Ukraine has shown us that you will always need people and kit. Retention is a huge problem. People joining but not staying past 8 to 12 years because you can earn better money and enjoy better living conditions in almost any other job or trade. The military would be a great career for a lot of today's youth, but higher education and university is prioritised by the state. And of course, the tale this week that I touched on a moment ago, the tragic story of Jaisley Beck, will also, Barney reminds us, act as some sort of deterrent for some people who may have been drawn towards joining the military in other circumstances. So here's a word. When we talk about, as we have all week, unprecedented change in the world order, you never sort of think it's going to happen on your watch. An incredibly lucky generation. Born when I was born. Born any time really after the 1950s. Incredibly lucky in the context of international movements and wars and that kind of thing. You never think it's going to happen on your watch. But if everything is upside down, as many people suggest, Simon Marks, our great friend, LBC's American editor, writing a brilliant article in today's newspaper, which simply talks about how the US, and I quote, now looks every inch an adversary of the UK and its European allies. Simon's in Washington, writing, the US now looks every inch an adversary of the UK and its European allies. It's unthinkable. Just 10 years ago, maybe even 2 years ago. But here we are. The US looks every inch an adversary and an enemy of the UK and its European allies. So what we've learned already is that retention is a bigger deal than almost anything else in this context. Even if Keir Starmer announced tomorrow he was going to increase military spending to 5% of GDP, where would it go if you can't get the bodies? Which is why the word conscription has started appearing in sensible discourse. Military service, conscription, national service. Well, if we need to find 30,000 troops tomorrow, where are we going to find them? And how would you choose them? That's an extraordinary moment. I must stop saying extraordinary. But it is, that is a truly unexpected development, isn't it? The notion that you combine all of the things we've learned so far today and conscription becomes an extremely viable answer to some of the questions being posed. Andy is in Le Mans in France. Andy, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. Thank you for taking my call.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, I've got 27 years of military service behind me, and you're on point with this, and I had to call you and get through and
Good.
Just let you know a few things that I know. Right through my whole career, I've lived many experiences with the consequences of defence cuts. And I can say, when I left the military a couple of years ago, that the military has lost not only its capability, but a lot of its reputation on the world stage. It's no longer feared by the people that needs to fear it people like, the Chinese and the Russians. We're just not a big deal anymore.
No, but we are part of NATO, though. So
we are part of NATO, James. The problem with NATO is that it is an untested piece of paper. Now, right through my whole career, I worked on one European NATO exercise that lasted 2 weeks, and it was a cluster.
Mm.
So it's an untested theory at the moment, whereas America is the
that's not fair. I mean, don't make me argue with a former Royal Marine, but there have been lots of NATO deployments that are not untested. I mean, Bosnia was NATO.
It is the truth, and any soldier worth his salt knows that that's a fact, because they would have lived the experience that I did. That is the facts of the situation.
But the NATO interventions in Bosnia and Herzegovina are a matter of historical record.
And I was there, James. I was working with.
I think I misunderstood what you mean when you say untested.
What I mean is, NATO, since its inception, has not formed along a line, looking left and right at the Italians and the French and the Spanish, and gone, right, we know what we're doing, let's go and do what we need to do. It's never been done. It's never been tested.
Okay. Ever. So what happened in Bosnia then?
What happened in Bosnia was a group of...
General Sir Richard Sheriff, when he talks about being deputy head of the NATO in Europe, NATO's second command in Europe, what was he in command of?
James, why is it when you don't like things that people say...
I don't understand what you're saying. No, you must. I mean, crikey, that's probably a fair criticism, but I've got no problem with what you're saying. I just don't understand it. And if I don't understand it, I worry that people listening don't. So what was he in command of?
Are you trying to compare what happened in the Balkans with what we need to do, which is face off Russia? It's two different things.
Yes, of course it is. Maybe I'm just a bit confused, Andy. Let's park that part of the conversation.
Thank you.
I don't understand what you are accusing NATO of, but tell me a little bit.
I'm not accusing NATO of anything. On paper, it should be enough that it's not been tested.
Right.
I think that's...
And the United Nations? Peacekeeping forces?
Oh my God. Do you want to go down that hole, or should we talk about the subject?
Well, what do you think this subject is?
The subject is the British military. The British military, as it stands today, isn't able to do what it is probably, and this is what all the people who are on the armed forces now are probably realising. If the Prime Minister is actually thinking about putting troops into Ukraine, then there needs to be a massive upscaling of what the capability is. And the key word is this.
Yes.
Capability, not spending money.
Right.
Because money can be spent, but the sharpness of that knife needs to be as sharp as you can get it.
Right.
For it to be capable of doing the job. The Russians and the Ukrainians today are fighting the most modern warfare that we've ever seen. And I can guarantee if you go into any infantry school in the UK, they're not talking or teaching how to outrun a drone at 60 kilometres an hour, because it can't be done.
No, okay. I mean, definitely we need to spend more. We need sharper knives. But just for I think out of respect for the people that served, NATO invoked Article 5 of its founding treaty in response to the 9/11 attacks back in 2001, the first and only time the article has been used. They were in Afghanistan for 20 years. They were very active in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So I'm just clarifying what I was confused by. But certainly that the idea that we are not as well equipped as we should be is, it's a given, isn't it? It's the whole point of this phone-in. Kieran's in Cardiff. Kieran, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. How's it going?
Pretty well. Don't have a go at me if I don't understand what you're saying, Kieran.
Well, it's just extraordinary, isn't it?
Go on, fill your boots.
Basically, 2 callers ago was talking about recruitment and retention, and I think he's pretty much spot on.
Yes.
I served 8 years in the Air Force. I left in 2016. Tried rejoining in 2018. And got told I couldn't because my shoulder, I had it reconstructed in 2011.
Gosh.
So you think about it. In 2011, I served a further 5 years with a reconstructed shoulder. Managed to redo all the process to go for medical and then get signed off as unfit.
So this is a very personal grievance. You feel that you could have still done a job for them, but they wouldn't let you.
I'd still go back in now in a heartbeat.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. That's tough. What do you do, or how do you think we persuade somebody sitting at home in Kidderminster, which is where I will be tomorrow, who just thinks we can't be spending more money on the army, we can't be spending more money on the military? What do you think it would take for the British population to wake up to these realities and these necessities?
I think we need to start showing how much of a threat it can be. I mean, Russia invades our waters and airspace all the time, yet it's never reported.
Yeah, that's true. Well, they killed people they killed Dawn Sturgis in Salisbury, didn't they?
People forget about it. People forget how conniving Russia can be.
Why is that? The Whitehall source speaking to the Telegraph last week said this thing about we don't feel threat. We don't feel any sense of threat. I think largely for geographical reasons, and that makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that because we're an island, we forget about the big wide world that is around us. We think because there's waters surrounding us, we're untouchable, but we're not.
And we felt that with the Ukrainian refugee crisis, that there was solidarity there in a sense that we are on the same side and therefore we will help these people. And yet we don't feel under threat in the way that you would need to in order to redirect huge amounts of public spending towards the military. Kieran, thank you. Take care. Bill's in Hereford, appropriate locale for a military phone-in. Bill, what would you like to say?
Hi there, James. So I left the military 6 months ago through a case of personal mismanagement. Okay. You can find that in any organisation, obviously, that you personally or even at a troop level would be mismanaged. In terms of the recruitment and the retention, there's a lot that the military can offer, which I don't think is advertised well enough to people looking to join, or those inside, for example, that are already in the military, to keep them in. But that also comes down to funding. The funding, as we know, has been cut years for a long time. So things like anybody who's in the military that's listening would know, adventure training, that has been cut to the bare bones so that you're unable to get away on things that you may see as a perk of joining. The opportunities to get away in terms of getting away on campaigns or on tours, there's obviously minimal options for that anymore. And so there's not so much incentive really for people to stay in when all they're going to be doing is going on exercise on Salisbury Plain or wherever they may be going.
What did it used to be like? What would have when there was more adventure training? What would that have involved?
So I only did 9 years. I managed to get away on 2 tours. Neither of them were particularly kinetic. But what I'm talking about is, so during the Afghanistan-Iraq time, recruitment and retention is always going to be higher during that. Peacetime is going to fall off because there's the opportunity to get away on those tours that people want to get away.
See, this is a point that I think those of us on Civvy Street don't fully appreciate, is that people join the military because they want to be deployed.
Yeah. They join, they want to be deployed, they want to get away. And when that opportunity
that's probably
isn't
the biggest thing that would change if we were to introduce some form of national service or conscription.
National service is a different one because that's politically very, very contentious, obviously. But I think going to the point as well, what you're talking about and what we need to do in order for people to understand the risk that there is without funding the military. There's a reason why Poland is looking to spend 4% of GDP on their military spending. That is because they have generational knowledge and generational scars that have been passed down of being a subjugated nation from, funnily enough, Russia, who obviously, as we know, what they're doing in Ukraine right now. We, as the last caller was mentioning, as an island, I think have a bit more of an isolationist mindset and think that we can get away with the peace dividend, as it's referred to, through not spending, as well as probably the rest of Europe is guilty for that and depending on the USA too much as well. Yeah. And until it's on our doorstep, and there is very high risks of that, it always annoyed me in the military where you'd be away on some exercise or some training and people would say, oh, well, if I'm going to be in the trenches doing this, something's gone wrong. Ask, Ivan that's sat in the trenches in Ukraine currently, if that's what he thought he'd be doing 2 or 3 years ago.
It was interesting, wasn't it? The contributor pointing out that we thought that war would have changed, that technology would have changed everything, but this is actually a very old-fashioned war for all the presence of drones and the like. This is about mass. This is about kit and people, isn't it?
I've not understood for a long time in that everything seems to be going towards a cyber footing and the funding for it. I never understood. I was obviously never at the strategic levels, but how they could view that kinetic warfare and boots on the ground was ever going to go away, and things would just be fought through drones and whatever else capability you want to talk about. And I think the top level management of the military, in some aspects, there's too much probably infighting on where obviously budgetary requirements need to be put, but as well as just mismanagement in general of views of how all of these funds should be managed.
And that can be sclerotic rather than incompetence. John Healey gave a speech a few days ago that probably deserved a little bit more attention than it got, and quite a few of you are pointing this out to me. And some of the stuff he pointed out gets filed under some of the stuff that Bill has been referring to about a sort of duplication, that's the word. I nearly said duplication. Duplication of roles where you can have 11 checkers for every one decision maker, which is why he explained it takes an average 6 years for a large program to simply get onto contract. So he is talking about fairly hefty reform of the military service. I suspect if that speech had been delivered after Donald Trump's recent interventions, it would have got even more attention than it got. But he did actually open by saying at the Institute for Government, where he gave this speech, that he didn't think a few weeks ago he'd have got the level of interest in a speech about Ministry of Defence reform that he actually got this week. But I'm here to say it would have been even higher if he was giving the speech today as opposed to at the beginning of the week. Thank you, Bill. It's 10:49. After this, we find out more about the Financial Times' harrowing investigation into suspected war crimes being committed by Russian troops on Ukrainian prisoners. And I warn you now, this is a horrible story.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:53 is the time. I'm going to give you a little taste of a film that has been made by Financial Times journalists, an investigative documentary that has found evidence that Russian executions of Ukrainian prisoners of war are not isolated incidents, but are likely to be part of a broader pattern that points to a systematic policy. And then we'll meet Christopher Miller, the FT's chief Ukraine correspondent, and who is currently in Kyiv. So here is a little clip from the film.
It's not a movie. It's human beings which have been killed. Every military person knows that you shouldn't rely on international humanitarian law.
They normalize evil. We must break the circle of impunity to prevent the Russian attack to the next nation.
.54 is the time. Christopher Miller joins me now from Kyiv. What was the trail you followed here, Christopher? Where did the original impetus come from? The original suspicion, I suppose, that led to the investigation?
Sure. Well, I've been living and reporting in Ukraine since Russia, long before Russia's first invasion in 2014. I've been here 15 years now, and we've seen this pattern over, years. Russia flouting international law. I noticed at the end of Russia's, let's say around the end of the first year of Russia's full-scale invasion here in Ukraine, at the end of 2022, early 2023, that there seemed to be a spike in a number of cases being reported of Russian soldiers committing executions or summary executions on the battlefield of Ukrainian soldiers who had surrendered and were taken captive. And some of these videos were starting to come out and be published on Ukrainian and Russian social media. Some of them were published by Russian soldiers themselves. Some of them were captured on drone video by Ukrainians who were, watching what was happening on the battlefield and seeing their own men come out of trenches with their hands up, unarmed, and then be gunned down. There was one case in particular of a Ukrainian soldier named Oleksandr Matsievsky, and it became this real sort of rallying cry for Ukrainians. He was seen on video, shot by Russian soldiers, being disarmed, and then asked if he had any final words as he lit up a cigarette and he said "Glory to Ukraine" before he was shot right there on the spot. And since then, we've noticed a spike again in these cases that really started to gain pace over 2024. And so over the course of the last many months, myself and my colleagues at the Financial Times set out to figure out whether or not this was Russian policy. And what we believe we have found is evidence of dozens of cases of Russian soldiers committing acts of not only violence, but executions on the battlefield.
And what, is it simply a question of gravity? Is it simply that if it's happening so frequently and so often, then it becomes harder to resist the conclusion that it is official policy? Or have you established any form of instruction, any form of formal policy?
Sure. Well, there is that. We've seen an increase in it. However, we also traced this particular execution case of 6 Ukrainians to a specific Russian military unit and even to one specific soldier. So we traced the tracks of a Russian soldier by the name of Oleg Yakovlev, who was from the Saratov region of Russia. He is a former convict who was part of one of these storm units that the Russians form with convicted felons. And particularly, he was a part of the 30th Separate Guards Motor Rifle Brigade. And they were actually awarded by the Kremlin and President Vladimir Putin an award for their service and their heroism in battle.
That unit's been implicated in multiple war crimes, as you mentioned. What sanction is there? I mean, goodness knows, especially with the events of this week, goodness knows what the end game looks like or what the light at the end of the tunnel looks like. But what is the possibility, process, likelihood of any of these people facing any form of justice?
Yeah, that's a big question here. We have the evidence. We've built some strong cases. The Ukrainian prosecutors have dozens of cases with very strong evidence of this. But it is going to be very difficult to see justice for many of these crimes. There is only one case currently of a Russian soldier who has been apprehended. He was taken captive on the battlefield, and he is currently jailed in Ukraine here and on trial for the execution of a soldier. And he has said that he did not carry out this execution himself. The Ukrainians say otherwise, and they've presented evidence. But definitely one very difficult thing is going to be reaching out to actually apprehend any of these soldiers who have committed these crimes. And certainly one of the big challenges is going to be holding their military commanders and political leadership, even up to the Kremlin, and especially someone like Vladimir Putin, accountable for these crimes.
I tell people here how they can watch your film shortly, but before that, how much traction do these cases accrue in Ukraine? How involved and informed is the Ukrainian public of these kind of atrocities?
Unfortunately, very informed. They would prefer not to see these videos, but there are so many of them. I mean, it's almost a relentless barrage in and of itself, seeing these things come out. I mean, late last year, it was almost 1 or 2 every single week that we would see as the Russians made their advances on the eastern battlefields of Ukraine, that these videos would surface either on Ukrainian or Russian social media or be sent to soldiers who would then provide the evidence of these crimes via video to journalists like myself.
And finally, Christopher, while I have you, speaking of public opinion, public information in Ukraine, how have Donald Trump's lies about Volodymyr Zelensky been greeted and indeed reported?
It's really shocked Ukrainians. I think Ukrainians are under no illusions about who Donald Trump is and how emotional he is and his reactions publicly. They dealt with him certainly in 2019 when there was the famous phone call between him and Zelensky that led to his first impeachment in the U.S. House. However, they understand that America is their biggest and most important ally here. They've relied very heavily on American military assistance and political and diplomatic support. So to hear the words that are coming out of Donald Trump's mouth, and as you yourself mentioned, lies, this is shocking to them and deeply concerning at a moment that is really crucial. They need all the support they can get if negotiations are going to happen, and they're going to need the Americans on their side.
Christopher Miller, thank you. We'll talk again, I hope. The FT's chief Ukraine correspondent and author of The War Came to Us, Life and Death in Ukraine, speaking to us from Kyiv. You can find the film that we've been talking about on YouTube. It's called Film Me, Russia's Executions of Ukrainian POWs Point to a Policy. It's a very, very detailed piece of work. I should add that the Kremlin and the Russian defense and foreign ministries did not respond to requests for comment from the Financial Times. In the past, Moscow has dismissed these sort of allegations of executions as propaganda, and its military command, as Christopher told us, has even handed awards to soldiers accused by Kyiv of involvement in the killing of 4 Ukrainian prisoners of war. It's 1 minute after 11.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Minutes after 11 is the time. Wasn't that an extraordinary juxtaposition? I've done it again. Wasn't that a chilling juxtaposition of contributions? Hearing from Kyiv about the war crimes being committed by Russian troops, and then hearing Elon Musk in the comfort of an American studio suggesting that the war of resistance in Ukraine is some sort of graft or grift. And I know this week has been a week of superlatives in the context of saying things are the worst they've ever been, but that's just the de facto co-president, as things stand, of the United States of America, accusing a man who received a standing ovation in Congress from members of all parties just 3 years ago of effectively being some sort of con man. And Musk, I think, believes it because he does seem to live entirely online. So this is such a masterstroke from the Kremlin over the period of 20 years to have just created a completely false discourse, a completely false narrative. And why would the richest man in the world be any more immune to it than your Auntie Doris or that woman I overheard on jury service last week, or you know, countless blue ticks on the platform that Elon Musk has bowdlerized? Why would he be any more immune to this sort of propaganda and these sort of lies than anybody else? Just because he's very, very rich doesn't mean he's possessed of faculties that the rest of us lack. He's very, very good at some stuff. It doesn't mean he's very, very good at critical thinking or working out the difference between truth and lies. And the effort, it's the point we all miss. Unless you've actually fallen for it, you find yourself thinking that the people who have fallen for it must be stupid or must be somehow degenerate, or there must be something wrong with them. But you have to stop thinking like that. It's like contempt for the con men, compassion for the con times a billion, isn't it? They believe stuff that is untrue. And they are not stupid people. They are not particularly gullible. And just because he's the richest man in the world does not mean that he would be any more immune to this than anybody else. So, I mean, he's clearly a very strange man. But I think it's probably a little bit easier to pin him down psychologically than it is his boss, his nominal boss, in that I think he is simply an example of the radicalized online right. He's like the godfather of the radicalized online right. The phone-in we probably won't have time to have today is very much a companion piece to this, because it's about freedom of speech. And Kemi Badenoch the other day saying that since he's bought Twitter, freedom of speech has returned. Nobody can tell me what it is that you're not allowed to say, unless it is just racist lies. But even that is not really very well policed. If you tell racist lies and then encourage people to go and burn down a hotel with asylum seekers in it, you're obviously committing a crime. But if you tell racist lies and don't then encourage people to go and burn down a hotel with asylum seekers in it, you're not committing a crime. The threshold would be very low. So what is this freedom of speech that people like Liz Truss and Elon Musk and Kemi Badenoch keep telling me, and Nigel flipping Farage, he never stops wanging on about it? What is it? That is the phone-in I would have had if Lottie's news bulletin hadn't brought me up short on that looming visit to the United States to be undertaken by Keir Starmer. Some discussion about who's going to get there first, Macron or Starmer, but who cares? That's an example of journalism, isn't it? Journalese. I don't think it matters in the great scheme of things if one of them gets there the day before the other. I don't think it speaks to favours or anything. Macron, if anything, has been a little bit more outspoken about Trump than Starmer has, although Starmer has stated in no uncertain terms that the claim Zelensky is a dictator is obviously fallacious, deeply fallacious. So here is the question. Here is the question. What should he do? What should Keir Starmer do? How much has that question changed in the course of this week? I began the week by drawing a distinction between politicians, diplomats and journalists. Keir Starmer's job is to act in the national interest. Identifying what the national interest in a space like this is absolutely bonkers. What is the national interest at a time like this? What is the UK's national interest, and how is it best served when you have an incontinent liar, a verbally incontinent liar in charge of the United States of America, lying about our allies, siding with our enemies. What on earth is the national interest? And I guess uniquely perhaps, Trump's inconsistency makes the question even more complicated. If Trump was absolutely 100%, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, psychopathic Vladimir Putin puppet, then Starmer's position would possibly be easier. You've got to do what Bill Browder said yesterday. You've got to go after all of the frozen Russian money, use that to replace the role that the United States of America plays, and as other callers suggested, actually start embracing a new world order where the United States is no longer our ally. Goodness knows what that means for places where American planes are currently stationed all across East Anglia and elsewhere, Mildenhall and other places. Goodness knows what that would mean in the context of shared projects and missions overseas. But the idea that you just excise or curtail or cut those links, cut those bonds is becoming increasingly feasible. Mandelson, the most... I mean, if I said pragmatic, you'd think it was a compliment. It isn't necessarily. You could say dissembling, a politician who prioritizes progress at every point over anything that could be described as principle or process. He's a fascinating figure, Mandelson. The thing he said about being supremely comfortable with extremely wealthy people, I get slightly exaggerated, but it's really interesting because he is talking about the national interest. It is in our national interest to woo billionaires. And he's not necessarily, I don't think he is wrong. But right now, what is the national interest? I mean, do we throw Ukraine under the bus? I don't think that's going to happen, looking at the noises that have already been made. But the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom is due next week to visit our most powerful historical ally, the most powerful ally a country could have historically, this country could have historically, at a time when the ally has allied himself with the enemy, with the regime that sends goons to these islands to murder our citizens, with varying degrees of success. What is the national interest? And what should Keir Starmer do? You can answer one or both of those questions. And this is one of those slightly rare phone-ins where I really don't know. I mean, to be honest, I only decided to do it as a phone-in about 12 minutes ago, so I can't be held to particularly high account for not having an answer to the question myself. But I think I will use my absence of conviction on this as an illustration of how difficult the challenge facing Keir Starmer is. Trump could throw him under the bus in an almighty fashion. And it pains me to say this, but there are elements of the right-wing media in this country that would celebrate the humiliation of our Prime Minister. The Daily Telegraph in particular seems to be in a really ugly place at the moment. I saw a Spectator writer writing about how Trump is right in the context. Still sort of, that might not be perfect, but I love how cross the libs get. I mean, surely that particular line has run out of road now. The idea that he's insulting the leader of Ukraine, and all the usual suspects are getting upset. Not a long list of Donald Trump cheerleaders, not a very long list of Donald Trump cheerleaders who are repenting, and that's ego. That's ego and psychology. That's a fear of shame. But you've got a couple, one or two of broken ranks. Farage, as ever, being very quiet, saying that you can't take Donald Trump literally, but you've got to take him seriously. I don't know what that means. I might remind you of some of the things Nigel Farage has had to say about Vladimir Putin over the years at some point in this hour. But the question I want you to answer is this. What should Keir Starmer do? I mean, that's too nebulous. I'm doing that thing again. Press 1 for overthinking and press 2 for a nice simple question. But that's a bit too nebulous. So as a phone-in, that doesn't quite land. What should Keir Starmer do? By all means ring in. But sometimes I need to finesse the question to get the highest quality of contribution. And of course, when I say what is the national interest at the moment, we go too far the other way. I don't know. What the flipping heck? I don't know. What is the national interest? But you can't really answer either question without answering the other one. What is the national interest? It's very easy to sit here and say the role of diplomats is to serve the national interest, even if that involves doing things that you are uncomfortable doing. You know, you look at some of the comments a politician like David Lammy has made about Donald Trump over the years, and you know that David Lammy is going to be uncomfortable. But he will be serving the national interest by keeping the president sweet. Can't walk into the White House and call him a Kremlin patsy. But he is. And this is where Zelensky broke ranks this week when he described accurately Donald Trump inhabiting a bubble of disinformation. And Donald Trump has gone predictably bananas as a consequence. I don't think Keir Starmer can do that. I don't think Keir Starmer can say Donald Trump is telling lies. He can diplomatically say, of course, Zelensky is not a dictator. But the idea that they could have somehow stopped the war, you've got Elon Musk essentially accusing Zelensky of being some sort of con artist. I mean, make your own list of the most egregious interventions from those two men and some of their allies. See, even a moment ago when I was praising John Healey's speech, which he delivered at the beginning of this week, I forgot that halfway through it, he said we're in a new era of threat that demands a new era for defence. And in the middle of everything else, last week, the new Defence Secretary, Pete Hegseth in the US, and I made time to discuss the aims we share on defence reform. Well, we don't share any aims anymore. Did we? Do we? And what aims do we share? What is the national interest if we are talking about a United States of America that wants to withdraw from NATO and give Ukraine in a gift-wrapped box to the murderous kleptocrat in the Kremlin? What does Keir Starmer do? I don't think he can tell the truth. It's not Love Actually, is it? I don't think he can do that. Maybe he can. I don't know. If you don't call it out, you embolden it. If you don't call out the lies, says Chris, you embolden the lies. Yeah, but what's the national interest? I don't think that's a mealy-mouthed intervention. If Keir Starmer goes there and tells the truth and it makes everything worse for the United Kingdom, are you going to applaud him home? Are you going to roll out the red carpet at Heathrow? Donald Trump responds to Keir Starmer's telling the truth by introducing enormous tariffs on all of our exports, crippling companies that have already been brought to their knees by the idiocy of Brexit. Are we going to celebrate? If Keir Starmer provokes Donald Trump by telling the truth in the way that Volodymyr Zelensky has done? You tell the truth to this man and he punches you. He hurts you. He tries to hurt you. Tell the truth, he tries to hurt you. So what on earth do you do? Good God, the more I go on about this, the more confusing it gets. What on earth is he going to do? What on earth should he do? What on earth would you do? So you can't dispute the fact that Donald Trump is telling egregious lies about our allies in Ukraine. You can't dispute the fact that he is either completely boiled by or opportunistically pretending to be consumed by a diet of online far-right radicalization. Steve Bannon made a gesture yesterday at this conference in the United States where I suspect old Farage is probably there. Steve Bannon made a gesture which looked suspiciously like a sort of half-hearted Hitler salute, a half-hearted Nazi salute. Someone suggested that's what it looks like when you're not rich enough to sue everybody who says that it's a Nazi salute. It was nowhere near as kind of striking as Elon Musk's. But it is impossible to exaggerate how perilous this moment is, and impossible, I think, to exaggerate how fraught Keir Starmer's position is. I mean, a week ago, like last Friday, it looked like a good thing that he was going to be one of the first European leaders to sit down with Donald Trump. I'm not sure it does now. I don't think he can get out of it, but I wonder whether he'd like to. But let's presume he goes. Let's presume that Keir Starmer sits down with Donald Trump. And the question becomes, what should he say? How should he deal with the lies that Donald Trump has told this week? Just this week. Let's forget the rest of it. How on earth should he deal with the lies that Donald Trump has told this week? It's 19 minutes after 11. I got a quick idiot's corner for you. Luke's been in touch. He says, "You're losing your marbles, James. America voted for Trump on a scale even you couldn't imagine." And then he writes in capital letters, "Woke over." Yeah, you got me there, mate. I'm losing my marbles. Every single syllable of what I've just said is demonstrably true. Every single echo of Donald Trump's words is on the record and on tape. I mean, there's even photographs, if you want an indication of how ludicrous the lies are. There are photographs of Volodymyr Zelensky with the American envoy Scott Bessent, actual photographs. And Donald Trump claimed on Air Force One yesterday that Bessent travelled all the way to Kyiv and Zelensky wouldn't see him. There's literal photographs of the meeting, but the president will claim that the meeting never took place. That's how bonkers it is. But what on earth can Keir Starmer do? What on earth can he do in this space, in the space of the lies? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. It's 20 past 11.
James O'Brien on LBC.
I don't know if he can. I mean, a lot of you suggesting it's quite straightforward. First off, says Jay in Runcorn, Starmer should refuse to deal with Musk or engage with Trump while Musk is in the room. Then he should just tell Trump straight, you've been out of the game for a while. This is the score. You've got it all wrong. If he flips his lid and comes out to the cameras scolding the UK, then so be it. We can tell him straight. Then, and Baz says he hasn't got the spine to deal with Trump, which is what's needed. In fact, we as a country haven't the spine anymore. I'm with respect, Baz, I'm going to need a little bit more than that. You think that spine involves telling a liar he's a liar, and then the liar punishes everybody back in the UK. I see. Well, look, maybe it's me, and it isn't very complicated or tricky at all, but I think it's a little bit trickier than you allow. How on earth do you handle a situation like this? What's a problem like Maria? Is that from The Sound of Music or West Side Story? How do you solve a problem like Maria? I can't do that. That's too trivial. Luca's in Fulham. Luca, what do you think?
Well, I think Trump just has a bit of a big mouth. I was reading an article today about how Colombia has refused to accept planes from the U.S. with deported Colombian citizens arriving in trains and military planes. And what did Trump do? He immediately folded and stopped doing that.
I don't think that's true.
I read an article just today about it.
Yeah, it might be out of date.
Oh, apologies then.
No, I think that it was. I mean, kind of Trump claimed it as a victory, but it was slightly misreported. It was not that Colombia wouldn't take. It was about the nature of how they were delivered, but they are now taking deported criminals back and deported people back into Colombia.
Yes, but so originally they were.
Well, let's not get bogged down in that. I don't think it's a victory for either side. I think it's a good example, perhaps, of real politics. But talk to me about the lies he's told this week and how Keir Starmer should deal with them.
Well, Trump's strategy this past 2 months has just been controversy after controversy, shell-shocking the world diplomatically, our diplomats. But Starmer needs to really just step up, hold a press conference, and double down on our support with Ukraine. And, we have Europe combined given over half of the support to Ukraine, and we can continue that because Russia is barely able to push through Ukraine, and the Ukrainians are holding firm. So if US pulls out, tragedy, of course, but I don't think that means there's an end for Ukraine in their fight for survival.
Can he do that without sort of humiliating Trump, or without Trump feeling that he's been humiliated?
Yeah.
Or does he just not mention the lies? He just doesn't say you lied, but
it would be up to him, but I don't think he has to mention it. We could play it safe and we could play it safe like that. But I think personally he should call out Trump's lies because as much as we need the US needs Europe far more. I think our trade deficit.
It's all gone a bit Brexit. It's all gone a bit Brexit, Luca. They need us more than us more than we need them. I mean that you move us into the area of tariffs, which would be one of the most obvious ways to respond. Emmanuel Macron, I think, has gone a little further than Keir Starmer has already. He has let it be known. He's told French media, and I quote, "I'm going to tell him that he can't be weak in the face of Vladimir Putin." So looks to me like Macron's playing a bit of psychology. Donald Trump will bridle at the suggestion that he is being weak. And Macron might be naive here. Most bullies bend the knee for a bigger bully. Well, it's one of the sort of great truisms of the schoolyard. It's almost as if Trump admires Putin because he's an even bigger bully than Trump can dream of being. Nigel Farage, of course, considers Vladimir Putin to be the world leader he admires the most. But Macron thinks you can possibly sort of shame the devil by saying you can't be weak. I don't know. But this puts Keir Starmer in a difficult position because he will come under pressure to be more robust in his dealings with the US president. This idea that he can be a bridge between Europe and Washington, endorsed or enforced in a way by the fact that he is so far refusing to publicly challenge Mr. Trump over his criticisms of Ukraine, puts him in a different position to Macron's. It doesn't mean he's wrong. Macron could be wrong. But just glancing at my inbox and my switchboard, I don't think there's much, at the moment, there's not much patience with the idea that he needs to be pragmatic. And I think that's naive. And I don't want to put myself in the position of defending what is perceived as weakness. But I don't know what is gained by marching in there and shouting the odds. Macron's tactic is one that Starmer could adopt, accuse him of weakness and say, you are strong. This isn't like you, mate. It's like the sort of friendly critic or the critical friend. This isn't like you. Why are you rolling over for this Putin geezer? That kind of I don't know, but it's an option. It's an answer to the question. Charles is in Bagshot. Charles, what would you like to say?
Hi.
Hello.
Thanks for taking my call.
You're very welcome.
Firstly, Trump's a thug and a bully, and it's a street fight. So Starmer can't play nice, unfortunately. So what he does is your previous guest spoke about these Russian assets which are currently frozen.
Yes.
He goes to Trump and he says, "Dear Mr. President, this is what's going to happen. If Ukraine is not at the table, we're going to seize immediately all those Russian assets." Trump then has to go to the American taxpayers if he wants to support Putin and replace that money.
Hey.
And how's that going to look? Yeah, if Trump says, "Well, I've got to,"
there's only about 13 billion of that is in America.
Yeah,
the rest of it's in Europe.
Even if it's one, well, if European together gets the agreement,
I'm not going to. I mean, you didn't realise that, which is fine because this is a very speculative conversation anyway. But that just doesn't work because the money isn't in America.
But it won't hurt America.
No, you can't carry on down this route, Charles. It's just been shut down. The roadblock's gone up. The money's not in the United States, so this theory doesn't work. But what it does do, what you highlight, is how complicated this situation is for Starmer.
Yeah, but he can't play nice.
You keep saying that, but I mean, your major rationale of what he could do instead is completely bogus.
Well, these assets, my understanding from your previous guest, is these are assets held primarily in the EU, and they're currently seized. But they're Russia's money. They're not America's money.
They're frozen, but it's got nothing to do. There's no circumstance in which the America would be on the hook for replacing the money. The way in which it might work, I shall come to your rescue, is that Putin would be so outraged by that Trump may then stay supportive of Ukraine rather than seeing the Russian money surrendered to the Ukrainian war cause because he's so frightened of offending Putin. But now we're really in the realms of ifs and buts and pots and pans.
But just an idea.
Anyway. Well, that's the point, isn't it? In a way, you want sort of everybody to ring in and have a go. I will politely point out flaws in the suggestions, and the more people have a go and the more flaws I point out politely, the harder Keir Starmer's job becomes, and the harder it becomes to claim that it is quite easy for him to know what to do. 11:30 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. How should Keir Starmer deal with the lies Donald Trump has told this week when he visits the White House next week? I suppose one answer to that question is not mention them at all, completely ignore them. But I want you to explain to me why you think that would be the right thing to do. It's 11:31.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:34 is the time. He does seem to be observing a period of uncharacteristic quiet, doesn't he? But he's almost certainly on his way to that conference in the United States of America where Steve Bannon has has been filmed giving what appears to be a fascist salute, and with a sort of little grin as well. It's a bit half-hearted. It's not like the one Elon Musk gave, but it's as if he's kind of a bit like a child who's delighted with their own naughtiness. Do you know what I mean? So if Nigel Farage is not on his way there, then I'm a dry roasted peanut. But just because he is observing a period of uncharacteristic quiet, I thought it might be a useful moment to reflect on some of his greatest hits.
The European Union provoked the conflict through our territorial expansionism in the Ukraine. We poked the Russian bear with a stick, and unsurprisingly, Putin reacted.
I was asked a couple of months ago which world leader did I admire, and I said Vladimir Putin as an operator, particularly the way he managed to stop the West getting militarily involved in Syria.
And I don't admire Putin. What I said was he'd outwitted and outclassed you all over Syria. I also said I didn't like him as a human being, and I wouldn't want to live in Russia. But what I want us to do, let's not meddle. Let's not meddle.
Hang on, just before you go on, you did actually say you admired him.
As an operator,
the
not as a
question
human
was,
being.
which current world leader do you most admire? As an operator, I would say Putin.
Yes.
You can like or dislike Vladimir Putin, and I wouldn't want to take him to see my mum for tea on a Sunday afternoon, I've got to tell you. But he is a very canny, very sharp, very clever political operator.
Nigel Farage, there are two things symptomatic of his condition. The first, he was parroting Kremlin propaganda about Ukraine and Crimea before Donald Trump had even gone into politics. He's been a pro-Kremlin propaganda mouthpiece for years. And the second bit was the fundamental dishonesty of the man. Two clips side by side. One begins with him saying, I was asked a question and I said that I admired Vladimir Putin. And the next one begins with him saying, I never said that I admired Vladimir Putin. And Dimbleby picks him up. God, those were the days when you had someone like Dimbleby dealing with these people rather than the toe-tickling exercises they get on the BBC these days. Dimbleby just reads him his own words. And he starts again. So he's literally just said, I never said I admired him. David Dimbleby reads him the words of him saying that I admired him. And then he starts trying to wriggle his way. Oh, yes, but not as a human, as an operator. So he said, I never said that I admired Vladimir Putin. And in the previous clip, he said, I was asked who I most admired, and I said Vladimir Putin. The way that he lies like the rest of us breathe. Absolutely extraordinary. And here we are. I mean, I suppose in a way it's a good week for him because now the two politicians he admires most in the world are on the same side in the Ukraine conflict. Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin joined at the hip, it would seem. 11:37 is the time. So what should Keir Starmer do next week? Answer, I haven't got a Scooby-Doo. Anthony's in Bletchley Park. Anthony, what do you think?
Morning, James. Well, I was feeling quite calm about chatting on the radio until I listened to Mr. Farage talk. The way I'm seeing it at the moment, it's a bit like a bullfight, is that you've got Keir Starmer who's going to be standing there with his matador's cape with a sort of one-ton bull herring towards him, accelerating, baying madly, or whatever bulls do. He's got a choice. Either he can stand in the way and get flattened, or he can deflect it to one side, which means, in my mind, he's going to have to operate far more like a lawyer than he is as a politician. And when you connect, one of the things that I think that may have been forgotten is that Trump remains hugely ambitious. He is desperate to get a Nobel Peace Prize.
Yeah, people keep telling me this. Is he?
Yes, he was twice nominated for it. If you look back in 2020,
I think anyone could be nominated. You could nominate me, Anthony. More pertinently, I could nominate you. Is he? Where do we get this idea that he's desperate to win?
You're not in charge of America, James.
Not yet. Not yet, Anthony. Not yet.
Thank you. My case rests gut. But the thing is that he, nonetheless, if you look at what he's trying to do, he's trying to set himself up for the preconditions whereby he can say, look at me, I solved the Gaza conflict. Look at me, I solved the Ukrainian conflict. And so I think that's true. I genuinely
I'm not going to argue with you. There's neither of us can win. We can't prove a theoretical.
And I think, therefore, if Keir Starmer tries to take him on head on, all that's going to happen is we're going to see even further unravelling relationships. So the only way he can possibly approach it is by talking to the president and saying, if you actually are serious about becoming viewed and achieving recognition as being a peacemaker, the only way you're going to do that is by taking the world with you, not having the world against you. And therefore, the rhetoric that you're expounding at the moment is antithetical to that aim. Now, he's going to have to do that in Starmer speak, which might be a bit challenging, but he's going to have to convince Trump that the only way that people will get behind him and will see him as the visionary Trump clearly believes he is by persuading him not to fall for the lies from the Kremlin, not to fall for the disinformation. The wrinkle, of course, is the fact you've got Elon Musk in there, who is, spewing complete drivel in his right ear at the same time. But nonetheless, Starmer is going to have to play on everything he's got, which is going to be the so-called special relationship. But also, he can play on the Five Eyes relationship. He can play on the symbiotic relationship.
But then you're not dealing with a bull anymore. You've suddenly segued without noticing from dealing with a bull to dealing with a rational operator.
But that's what he's got to try and do, because as I said at the beginning of my idea, is that he's either got to try and take the bull head on, which is going to end up him being flattened, or try and deflect it. The only way he can deflect it is by trying to convince Trump not to be a bull, but to be a rational operator. This hinges on whether you believe the man's sane or not, of course.
Yeah, that's true. What happens in public and what happens in private will be different. So which bits of what because in some ways, lots of people are citing that press conference in Love Actually. I need to refresh my memory of it, but Hugh Grant's...
I was going to go down that route.
Hugh Grant's character kind of breaks with all convention and gives the United States president a real humbling, a real lesson.
Yeah,
but I don't.
Wire brushing.
We know he can't do that. But what you've just said, what bit would happen publicly?
I think what's going to happen publicly will be Starmer saying something like, the president and I have had a full and frank exchange of ideas, and we have established that we are more in agreement on more aspects than we are in a disagreement.
Right.
It'll be some complete asinine twaddle like that, which everybody will pick up on and look at it and say, oh, that sounds great.
Like a holding play, Shelley says.
It's going to happen.
A holding play, listen more than talk, and then present a relatively united front, because you're not going to be able to persuade Donald Trump to change course
not in public.
If you give him a kicking in public, which is diplomacy. That's the difference between diplomacy and journalism, isn't it?
And I think the other thing is that if you go back to sort of the fundamentals of strategy, which is the interplay between social, technology, economic, politics, military and security, which goes back to what we were talking about the army at the first stage, is that in the past you had the step factors and the military and security factors. They were all intertwined towards a common aim. The problem with Trump is he has managed to put clear blue water between social issues, technology issues, economic issues, political, military and security issues. So it's very difficult to find a unifying theme down which any rational politician can go.
That's a really good point. And add to that this point from No Hostages about Starmer's inability to become a bridge between Trump and Europe, because the limited success the UK had in the past in this role was based on the idea that there were shared interests and values. Starmer doesn't share any values or interests with Trump.
No, he doesn't. But I think what he's got to do, and if you're speaking to your point about he's got to operate he's got to be diplomat. He's also got to be a statesman, because not only has he got to try and operate with Trump, he's also got to try and persuade Europe behind him, to sweep Europe in behind him. Where you have the whether we like it or not, the right of right-wing populism, whether it be Orban in Hungary or whether it be Meloni in Italy or whatever. He's got to convince them that Europe's interests are being served in a way that does not undermine the position of Europe in the eyes of the Americans, because the last thing the Europeans are going to want is for Starmer to say something where Trump says, well, in which case I'm going to screw the Americans, I'll screw the Europeans over.
And now you're back to treating him like a super rational, sane being, which
I refer the court to my previous
comment. That is, as I think most people probably agree now, even if you didn't at the beginning, that is why Starmer's position is really, really difficult. Look, you could turn up and say, yeah, you big fat liar, Donald Trump. You could just sort of channel one of my monologues, but that would not serve the national interest, and neither would it actually be particularly statesmanlike. I would correct my learned friend on one thing, actually. The journalists have won the Nobel Peace Prize before. Indeed, I think Maria Ressa, who we were talking about yesterday with Bill Browder, is the finest recent example of that. It is 11:45. Adam's in Nottingham. Adam, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James. Sorry, I'm feeling a bit nervous as usual.
It's only me.
I know.
Go on.
I know it's only you. No, I've sort of been thinking about it at the moment, and I think the only rational thing which we can actually do is actually delay a visit.
So Dave wrote, and you're obviously being a bit more sensible than he is. He wrote he should pull a sickie.
Well, more or less, yes. No, the reason is that Trump isn't actually looking at this. He isn't looking at this from a diplomacy point of view. Actually, he's looking at this from almost, shall we sort of say, a chaotic stroke economic point of view going forward. The reason being is I think we've got to look at this from the point of history and where we are now. We're in a period of disruption, and that's been caused in general by the tech giants. And if you look at what's basically happened over 5 to 10 years, our economies have been drained both through tax revenue. It's been generally been tax revenue, and the actual eroding of our economy
yes.
down to those individual companies. And what you've sort of seen with Trump 2.0 is actually the tech guy coming in, disrupting the actual all of the structures, generally the military capabilities. Trump's been always going on about having everybody put more money into NATO. What's basically happening at the moment is Trump's trying to get Europe to pay more money to get in terms of
I mean this is all valid analysis, but it doesn't necessarily speak to the reason why Starmer should pull a sickie next week. Joyce says he should send Angela Rayner instead. Claim he's got COVID and send Angela Rayner instead. I mean, your breakdown of the economic issues in the interests of the big tech companies is bang on the money, although that's beginning to move as well. It's extraordinary how quickly everything changes, with some pretty pertinent suggestions that some of these big tech people may already be regretting getting into bed with Donald Trump quite so enthusiastically, given what he is now doing on the world stage. And when it starts registering at home, it'll be really interesting to see what kind of impact this stuff is happening. Adam, you've taken me a little bit beyond the break, so thank you.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. What do The Sun, Radio 4, Talk Radio and Times Radio have in common? They all carried a story this week alleging that £8 billion of public money had been squandered on woke projects. The other question that I've got for you, can we get them both ready? Can we get... So what... I don't mind which order you do them in. What happens when this...
Woke Watch
meets this?
Missed information.
Oh, that was fun. Can we do that again? Can we do that once more? What happens when this...
Woke Watch
runs headlong into this?
Missed information.
So if you're just tuning in and wondering what the hell is going on, those are irregular features on the programme which highlight two things. Woke Watch highlights how ludicrous the deployment of the word woke is in almost every case when it appears in so-called journalism. And Missed Information is about things that are reported with a straight face by supposedly reputable media organisations that are, to use a technical phrase, complete rollicks. And our friends at Full Fact have done a rather good job in this case of combining both into one story. And it involves our old friends at the Taxpayers Alliance, one of the motherships of opaquely funded organisations that somehow managed to make their way into almost every studio and newsroom in the country. Leo Benedictus is the journalist with the independent fact-checking charity Full Fact, and he joins me now. I mean, there is a line in your report that I'm very tempted to begin with, but let's build up a little tension first, if we can. £8 billion on woke projects, Leo. That's a terrible old business, isn't it?
Well, £8 billion is a lot, I think, by anybody's measure. I mean, I should certainly say that we're not in the business of determining what counts as woke and what doesn't. So people are totally entitled to their views. But yes, the Taxpayers Alliance did some research and made a list of projects that have been funded by government grant funding by UKRI, which is essentially a big umbrella organisation that sends funding money down through various other organisations to different projects. And they found a list of 26 projects that they considered woke and added up how much they cost. And that's how it made its way into media in this way. But they didn't cost £8 billion.
Don't spoil it yet. Before that, we're building up to it. I want people to take a guess. If £8 billion wasn't quite the correct figure, why don't you send me a little message? And remember, you might have heard this story and you won't have heard the correction. You might have read this story. You won't have read the correction. So £8 billion is the figure, right, that they claim. What do you think the real figure is? Start texting me your suggestions on 84850 or WhatsApp me. On the usual number 03456060973. Leo, what made your antennae twitch over at Full Fact? What made you think, hang on a minute, this seems a little bit high, and we will find out how high shortly.
Yeah, we're giving people a clue there, aren't we? I mean, the true answer is lower than £8 billion.
Spoiler alert.
That was my first reaction. I mean, yeah, £8 billion is an enormous sum of money, but these numbers, they do get people, I think, get kind of blind to them. You know, we work with them every day, but however many millions, however many billions, the governments do deal with those kinds of numbers all the time. But, you know, the NHS annually is what is about sort of 180 billion. Sorry, I'm doing it myself, or something like that. So, you know, 8 billion is really quite a significant amount of money. And yeah, when I saw that 8 billion was being spent on work projects, I did think that's an awful lot. I'm not sure I believe that, and started looking into it. Yeah. I mean, I should say that there is a line in sort of down page in the Sun's article, which gives a little bit of context here. They do say that 8 billion is the total amount of funding that goes out through UKRI altogether, and that only a portion of that goes on the woke projects as identified by the Taxpayers Alliance. But yeah, it's
and it was on the Taxpayers Alliance own Facebook page that they actually wrote, we revealed with the Sun that the government has squandered £8 billion on woke projects such as studies in the ontology and ownership of internet dance. So you're right. I mean, that you could, if you were feeling generous, claim that the Sun had, despite sticking the figure of £8 billion on their front page, that they had qualified it slightly in the text, but no such qualification on the Taxpayers Alliance Facebook page until you got in touch with them.
Yeah, I mean, they did correct it pretty quickly once I told them about it to the correct number, which we'll hear shortly.
James suggests £2.75. I'm not sure he's taking this terribly seriously, but
yeah,
it's a little bit higher than that. Go on. So they claimed £8 billion. It got picked up by Times Radio, Radio 4, who should know better. I suppose in their defence, they did it in the newspaper review. Sun journalists are tweeting and posting it all over the place, various other media organisations. If they count as such, one of them doesn't really have any listeners to speak of. But if the correct figure was not £8 billion, Leo Benedictus, I feel like Jeremy Clarkson now on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. What was the figure?
The correct figure was £10.4 million. And now, you know, some of your listeners may immediately react to that by thinking, well, that's still a lot of money. And from a certain point of view, of course, that is still a lot of money. But the difference between 10 million and 8 billion really, really is a lot. It's a hard thing, I think, to grasp immediately. But I did some advanced maths for you, which I hope might be useful to illustrate this point. It's often easier to understand these things in terms of duration, periods of time, than it is sums of money. So if you imagine we were talking about seconds instead of pounds, then 10 million seconds is about 4 months, give or take.
Yeah.
And 8 billion seconds is more like 250 years.
Oh, this is fantastic. And do we know how they managed to make such a terrible error? Or is it's the entire research and innovation budget, which isn't even annual, is it? Some of that is going to be spent on a rolling basis, not all within a single year. And they have presumed that the tiny examples they find of things that they don't think we should be spending money on accounted for the entire budget.
Yeah, I mean, it does get a bit complicated how the budget is distributed per year, but yes, the total budget for UKRA is in the region of about 8 billion in each of the last few years. How that's distributed around these projects is slightly hard to say, but yes, it's something like that's what they spend every single year on absolutely everything is 8 billion, and the portion that the Taxpayers Alliance consider woke is about 10 million, which is, yeah, to put it again very clearly, an awful lot less.
The line that I wanted to open with, but prefer to build a little tension, is this. After contact from Full Fact, the Taxpayers Alliance corrected this post and replaced £8 billion with £10 million. not an accounting error that you get away with in many other lines of work, but I don't expect it to alter in any way the season ticket that some of these people seem to have into BBC and other studios. While I have you, Leo, what about the story in The Sun last week about us sending Porsches to Albania?
Yeah, so that was the day before they mentioned it. They had a couple of articles actually on government waste, and one of them did mention the government sending Porsches to Albania. This is actually something we looked at the previous week when we saw it on social media. There's an element of truth in here, but basically it's not true. The government didn't send Porsches to Albania. They sent Volkswagens, which is, I guess, sort of similar, but not the same. This is a deal that the government did with the Albanian government in order to sort of exchange Albanian prisoners for cars. Essentially, Albanians who were in jails in the UK were sent back to Albania, and as part of the deal, the UK government sent some electric cars to Albania
as a sweetener for the government, not for the actual prisoners. Before anybody at the Sun starts writing another article, I don't know how long it will be. I don't know how long it will be before I take a call on the programme in a week or a month's time, and they cite this article. Not yours. They cite the Sun article or the mention that they heard of it on Radio 4, because that old line about a truth, a lie is halfway around the world before the truth has got its trousers on. So in that context, the work that you do has arguably never been more important. How can people find out more about Full Fact, Leo?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, our website, fullfact.org, you'll find all of our fact checks on there. And of course, you can follow us on all the different socials. We've got accounts here and there where we keep updated on what we do. I mean, on that point you mentioned, you're absolutely right. It's one of the issues here. I think we often see about headlines, even though the article contains a sentence lower down that sort of makes clear what they're talking about, although it doesn't actually include the 10 million figure. The headline is what people see. That's what people remember. You may well be right. And the fact that we could immediately actually use some AI tools which helped pick these stuff up. We were able to scan what people were saying on the radios and found that, they were very often taking this 8 billion figure as read. They didn't read the whole article.
And of course, on social media, it's just a screenshot of the front page anyway. So there's no opportunity to read further into it. And that is even more than halfway around the world. Leo Benedictus of the independent fact-checking charity Full Fact. Many thanks for your time. We did get in touch with the Taxpayers Alliance. While we are happy to acknowledge and apologise for the error in the Facebook post, they said, just run by that error again. £8 billion turned out to be 10 million. We are yet to see an apology from those responsible for the millions of pounds of taxpayers' money that has been so egregiously wasted on woke projects. I never, ever say never. Does that make sense? But I don't know that we will ever find a better example of what happens when Woke Watch meets
missed information.
It's 12 noon.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 4 minutes after 12. It's Friday. It's been a tough week. It's a tough old diet of news, isn't it? So I am interested in this growing claim that our free speech, it's essentially foreign people who wish us harm, claiming that free speech in this country is threatened, and then traitors in our own midst agreeing with them. It's an extraordinary state of affairs because no one can ever tell me what it is that they're not allowed to say. But we may save that for next week. I think inevitably Farage is indeed at that conference where Steve Bannon appears to have given a fascist salute, and is still not really going in hard on Donald Trump's lies about Volodymyr Zelensky, but is heaping praise on Elon Musk and claiming that free speech in this country is under threat. I tell you what, if free speech was under threat, he'd be out of a job, wouldn't he? 4 minutes after 12 is the time. So, right, do you want to come with me on a tightrope walk? Shall we? Because this is going to be tricky for me and for you. It's going to be tricky for everybody. There is a tightrope of snobbery here that we need to, because I love this story and I can't quite tell you why, but I can try to. I've always enjoyed stereotype defiance, like a defiance of stereotypes. I tell you something that drives me nuts, actually, and we've talked about this a lot on the programme. The way that middle class has been used as a phrase to describe two or three things that are unalloyed goods and should apply to everybody. So you get a little bit sneery. It happened with Jamie Oliver when he was trying to encourage people not to poison their own children. And it was always middle class, as if working class people want to exist on an unleavened diet of turkey Twizzlers. So the idea that working class people, whatever that phrase means, can't enjoy cooking fresh food or somehow have less developed palates. It's a superb piece I read somewhere the other day, I can't remember where it was, about the way in which the right wing's treatment of the working class has changed. And there were a couple of examples of people writing in disgusting terms about the working class 10 years ago, but now sort of casting themselves, people who went to public school, journalists casting themselves as champions of the working class or the white working class. So I hate the way that middle class, also you get it with books. You recommend a book, it's so middle class, as if being working class means you don't like books. It's a way of keeping, I suppose, the proletariat, keeping them under the thumb. Because, oddly, two stories married together today. Lisa Nandy has talked about the way in which arts courses were described as Mickey Mouse degrees of being economic madness. And you know that fascists hate art because art teaches you empathy. The only circumstances ordinarily in which we might find ourselves imagining what it's like to be somebody else is through art. It's no coincidence that the post office scandal didn't really land with the British public until it was turned into a drama. You could have had 100 documentaries. You could have read 1 million articles about how egregious the treatment of sub-postmasters was. But until it was turned into a real drama, until it was dramatized, it doesn't land with us. It's the nature of our species. We love stories. And the reason why fascists generally like to burn books or tell lies about free speech or claim that things are being curtailed when they're the ones doing the curtailing is because art teaches empathy. Imagining what it would be like to be a refugee, imagining what it would be like if your daughter was trying to make her way towards a family planning clinic and then some bigot claiming that they were motivated by Christianity rather than just a desire to bully was inflicting psychological harm on them as they made their way down that road. All of this stuff is relevant, but it's not really what we're talking about today. Well, it might be, actually. Yes, it will be. Because, I think that's it. The tightrope has just expanded. It's now a gangway. Because there's no danger of snobbery here, because I've just described what I hate. And I hate the way that people think that class and culture are intertwined, that because you're working class, your attitude to culture will somehow be different from how it would be if you were middle class. Education is a great divider, but this headline here, you must be wondering what on earth we're going to be talking about. Are you ready? The white van man is smarter than you think. There's a headline in the Daily Telegraph today, who I don't think have successfully negotiated the tightrope of snobbery. The white van man is smarter than you think. Well, what does that mean? A third of white van men are privately educated, research shows. Well, speaking as someone who was privately educated, I can tell you without a single scintilla of doubt that private education does not translate as intelligence or smartness. Isn't that an interesting? Haven't they accidentally given away something there over at the Daily Telegraph? If you went to private school, then you must be smarter than someone who didn't. So they write the headline, the white van man is smarter than you think. And the story turns out to be that a third of white van men are actually privately educated. I went to private school with some lads who were as thick as mince. They're in the Conservative shadow cabinet. No, I'm joking. But just like you did, you went to school with some people who were as thick as mince. Why do you think Tim Nice but Dim was such a winning character for Harry Enfield? The idea that being posh equals being intelligent or being wealthy equals being smart. Probably one of the biggest obstacles to social mobility that this country endures. It gets worse. Research carried out by Mercedes-Benz Vans found that 33% of van drivers under the age of 35 went to private school. And just under half of that van driving age group now hold foundation, bachelor's or master's degrees. So the plebs actually went to university as well. Unbelievable. Now, why do I like this story? for two reasons. The serious reason why I like this story is it speaks to stereotyping. But the other reason why I like it is because it describes the world I live in. It describes the world in which driving a van, a white van or a grey van or even a blue van, doesn't tell me anything about you except the fact that you drive a van. It doesn't tell me what your education level is. It doesn't tell me what you think about opera. It doesn't tell me what you had for tea last night. And it doesn't tell me what you might be reading at the moment. I mean, is it shocking? Is it surprising to read that a white van man is likely to have been privately educated or to have gone to university? I don't know. It probably speaks more about a dearth of employment opportunities in some sectors than it does about anything else. But what I love about the story is the hyacinth bucket element of it. The fact that so many people still look at you and see what you do and arrive at conclusions that are hideously wrong. I don't know quite what the best example of this is. I don't really have any from my own life, except I'm very scruffy. I wanted to buy a flat once, and I went into an estate agent's in my usual scruffiness, and I walked through the door and straight away looked up and said, "Rentals are downstairs." That was just based entirely on my appearance, which I thought that was a little bit rum at the time. And I put an offer in on a flat about a week later, but not through those estate agents. It's not quite a Julia Roberts moment, is it? I didn't go back into the estate agents the following week and go, "I just bought a flat round the corner from your rivals." Big mistake. Huge. I haven't seen Pretty Woman for a very long time, but it's a kind of example of what I'm talking about. The way that people judge books by their covers. And do so wrongly. And that's really what I'd like to talk about. I hope this works, because I think it's great fun. Can we try and find the poshest white van man in the country as well? Would that or is that me falling off the tightrope of snobbery? I love the idea that you chuckle, because you're quite secure and well-adjusted. You chuckle quietly at the social insecurity and snobbery of other people. So people treat you in a patronising or a condescending fashion, whereas actually you are not the person that they think you are, or the person that deserves, in their mind, to be patronised. This is nice. This is exactly what I'm talking about. James, I'm an ex-white van man. I write poetry. I love problem solving on the hop, and I used to earn over 50 grand a year. But shush, it's our secret. They think we're all dumb. There it is. James, I was privately educated, writes Gary. I have 2 first-class honours degrees, and I'm currently delivering parcels in a van. It is silver, not white. I have highly educated conversations with my customers who seem to find it both surprising and refreshing. And Anthony reminds us that today it's perfectly feasible for a doctor or a teacher to earn less than a white van man. What is the question I need you to answer? And tell me about the time that you have been horribly patronised because people were judging your book by your cover. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. That's all. That's what I want to know. So I couldn't quite pin it down, but I have now. The very way that this article is written and the very way that it's headlined is so snobbish it's untrue. The white van man is smarter than you think. No, he's not. Why would I think someone driving a van was stupid? I never thought someone driving a van was stupid. It's the Daily Telegraph journalists who think someone driving a van is stupid, but they're not alone. You do, and you may not be a van driver, you may be doing something else. Those lads that we listened to in the Painting and Decorating podcast earlier in the week were actually brilliant broadcasters. And why wouldn't they be? If you're working as a painter and decorator, why wouldn't you actually be brilliant at my job if someone gave you a chance? So when someone has made completely completely fallacious, arrived at completely false conclusions about you because of what you do or how you look. And I'd quite like examples of I would quite like humiliating reveals. You know, when someone is being snobbish towards you and you reveal that you've got better A levels than they've got, or whatever it is. Do you know what I mean? Making presumptions about you, socio-economic, class-related presumptions. Joel's been in touch. He says, James, I drive a red van and I am as thick as mince. Except, of course, he's not, because that is a good joke. And being able to make good jokes is a sign of a form of intelligence. It's 12:15. I want the story about someone arriving at conclusions about you that are, hilariously wrong. And that's all I want. As an added bonus, as an extra win, there would be also the reveal, where you end up embarrassing the person who's arrived at the conclusion, the false conclusion about you, by just casually dropping into the conversation that you're actually a Viscount. No, God, snobbery. You're actually a resting brain surgeon. It's 12:16. You know the number.
James O'Brien on LBC.
18 minutes after 12. Your homework for this weekend is to speculate on what it is that they're all talking about when they say that our freedom of speech is under threat in this country. The only thing I can remember anybody getting criticised for recently in the political sphere is when Elon Musk did Nazi salutes. And, obviously there were plenty of people pretending that he hadn't, but there were also absolutely no prospect whatsoever of him being in any way punished or sanctioned for it. So that's presumably why Steve Bannon appears to have done a sort of half-baked version of the same at this conference that Nigel Farage and Liz Truss are attending. So what is it that they're not allowed to say or do if they can do fascist salutes on the stage without suffering any consequences or sanctions? I don't know. Maybe that's what they want. They want more fascist salutes. I honestly don't know. But that's next week, probably. Simon's in Croydon to talk to us about the white van man is smarter than you think. Smarter than who thinks? What's your story, Simon?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello.
Great to talk to you.
Likewise.
Yeah, what I'm doing now, painting and decorating, which is through a life problems and a bit of mental health issues. But I did a degree in cell and molecular biology. I spent a few years developing blood testing kits for infectious diseases. I then became a chartered accountant, did that for 20 years, worked in banking.
How old are you? 104?
Just turned 53, actually.
God, you crammed a lot in.
I too got a D in physics at my GCSE.
It didn't hold you back.
Same age, actually.
It didn't hold you back, and so people see what you're doing now. I presume you've got a van, have you? If you're painting and decorating.
I actually avoid buying a van for that very reason. I drive a hatchback car.
Got everything in the back, and people make presumptions about you that are entirely at odds with your actual background.
Yes, I guess so. But I mean, they're after a painter and decorator after all. Not someone who's sort of got an educated background, so to speak.
Yes.
And there's nothing wrong with that. But yeah, I walk around quite often covered in paint. During the day, I'm walking around shops and stuff. Probably look like a homeless person, really.
I don't know that they're covered in paint very often, but there's a degree of scruffiness that you decide. And then what happens? So then you're in the house doing a job. Customers think that you're one thing, and then they realise that you're not. How do they realise that you're not?
Because I'm listening to LBC, James, all day.
That might not defy the stereo. Depends what time of day it is, doesn't it, Simon? Not to be too crass, but I don't know. So there is a presumption of a certain type of politics, I think you describe, if you're working in that kind of field, which is both patronising and wrong, in my experience.
A little bit, yeah, but it's like one customer, I started talking to him about, blockchain technology and stuff. He's in the IT field. And then, once I start doing that, then I sort of reveal my background. People seem to like it.
It's a lifestyle choice. We are generally a well-educated population. I'm not sure what the direction of traffic is at the moment, but certainly access to higher education doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to want to go down certain paths. A few of you, Gavin actually referencing that Emily Thornberry gaffe, that appears in the Telegraph article as well. It's really funny, isn't it? So the Telegraph write a headline, "The white van man is smarter than you think." Thank you, Simon. And implicit in that headline is the idea that if you're driving a white van, you must be stupid, right? Otherwise, the headline doesn't work. The headline only works if you are subscribing to the idea that people who drive white vans are uneducated, are poorly educated. I mean, leaving aside the conflation of intelligence with education, of which, of course, Jacob Rees-Mogg is the patron saint. The idea that just because you're well-educated means you must be intelligent. You will never find a better proof of how untrue that is than J-Dog. But the Telegraph write a headline absolutely endorsing the idea that we all think people who drive white vans are poorly educated, and then reminders of the time everyone pretended to be offended when Emily Thornberry did exactly the same thing. Sneering at the white van man has previously left politicians in peril. Labour MP Dame Emily Thornberry posted a photo on Twitter of a Medway terrace with a white van in the driveway and 2 England flags hanging from the windows. She resigned, or she offered her resignation the next day. That was 10 years ago, 11 years ago. And all she wrote was "image from Rochester." But the accusation was that she was somehow presuming or conveying the idea that the white van was an emblem of something negative, something ugly. And yet the Telegraph headline literally endorses the idea that we all think people who drive white vans are poorly educated. It is 23 minutes after 12. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Martin's in Muswell Hill. Martin, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello,
Great show.
Thank
really
you.
enjoy it. Yeah, I'm a builder, and I went to public school, and my wife asked me one day to go and pick the kids up from swimming, and I'd just taken down a ceiling, and so I looked really bad, and I went into McDonald's to get a coffee, and they served me a coffee, and the guy behind the counter said, "It's all right. That's on me." Really, it's free.
That's the opposite of snobbery, isn't it? It's jumping to the wrong conclusion, but in a really nice way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it's quite funny.
It's more, I mean, you turn up to pick the kids up from school and other mums arrive at conclusions about what you are or what you've done. How did you go down that route? Did you always want to do building?
No, I was a photographer for years and years, and I still take pictures. And then when digital came along, I sort of struggled a bit.
Yeah, of course.
I got older, and all the people commissioning me were suddenly my son, that age, and they didn't want to commission someone as old as me.
Right.
So it's sort of, I could have probably carried on, but I sort of drifted out of it. And but now I do landscapes and really enjoy
nice.
it.
No, well, and there it is. This the sort of Daily Telegraph worldview that we're all compartmentalised and defined for our entire lives by class and socioeconomics is horribly out of date. But I guess we're all a little bit guilty of it. These are my favourites, but I don't know what you look like, David. I walked into an Audi showroom with my wife, and before we said a word, the salesman came over and said the second-hand cars are outside. Why would that be? Why would that be? I'm a petite, well-dressed woman from the Welsh Valleys. I don't have much of an accent because I've moved around a lot, and therefore I regularly hear other people discussing Valleys people. I'm a professor at a top university. I didn't know that. A perception that if you're from the Valleys, you wouldn't be very bright. And you also get it in music as well. Ian points out that the Super Bowl halftime show last week contained a presumption about certain types of music and members of a certain culture being a certain type of person or having had a certain level of education. It's because the person arriving at the conclusions, the person jumping to the conclusions, doesn't understand the subject matter. How are we going to find the poshest one? I mean, how do you even define posh? Because it's not going to be... there's the problem, you see. That's me falling into the trap of conflating class with intelligence. So I wanted to find the poshest white van man, but you could be stupid. You might be an earl or the son of an earl, and you'd be the poshest white van man in the country, but you wouldn't be clever. I'd still drawn to the idea of finding the poshest white van man in the country, but that's not the point of this story. Is it? It's about intelligence and education, and it's about people happily doing jobs where they don't need to deploy their intelligence or their education every minute of the shift, and the speed with which other people reach for these stereotypes. Sean's in Ipswich. Sean, what would you like to say?
Well, it's just about the fact that the misconceptions of how you appear cuts both ways. I was once, as I was telling your research or whatever, that I was locked in at a hospital after doing some work, but I was dressed reasonably smartly. I work on burners for a living, so I'm normally filthy and in overalls. And,
what's a burner like in a boiler room burner?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
yeah, but sort of industrial ones, large ones that burn bodies and stuff. And so,
bloody hell, you slipped that into the conversation, Sean.
Sorry,
no, that's fine.
Not complete bodies, but parts.
Just stop it now. Stop it. All right, carry on. Holy moly! I
not
was
just
not
that. I do all sorts.
Oh, right, yeah, okay. So you would normally. So you've got your van. You're in your van. You can't get out.
Yeah.
You go into reception.
Can't get out. Go into reception. There's a lot of what they would call mobility scooters outside blocking me in. And I said, "Does anybody own the red one?" And because I was dressed reasonably nicely that day, little old lady stands up and says, "I'll move it, dear, as you're a doctor," being far from a doctor. But then I've had it the other way. Just because I'm in a pair of overalls, people think I'm an idiot.
Yes.
So, and I experienced that before, called in as an expert on what I do and being doubted by the man in a suit and tie. So there we go.
I know, I like that a lot, and it is there, and I think the world is changing. Looking at, what was I watching the other day? Brief Encounter. Have you seen Brief Encounter? It's a beautiful film. We went on Valentine's Day, actually, which is slightly odd. It was the Valentine's choice at the local cinema, but it was a slightly odd Valentine's choice. So it's about two people who nearly, I don't want to do any spoilers, but nearly have an affair. And I was thinking about the class element of it. At that era, Noel Coward wrote it. They only really made dramas about the people who would be wearing trilby hats and suits. Never about the people who would be the cat house. Do you remember the housekeeper in Just William? We live in a much more democratic society than we did not long ago, and yet some of our attitudes, as this phone-in demonstrates, haven't really caught up with the new reality. Thank you, Sean. And that goes down as probably the most unexpected contribution of the week, halfway through that conversation. It's coming up to 12:30. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:33 is the time. Listen, there's no way you can give me a hard time for giving away the plot of Brief Encounter. The film's about 100 years old. If you haven't got around to watching it yet, that's on you, not on me. This is my favourite so far from Nathan. Somehow managing to understand what I was asking for, despite the fact that I couldn't properly articulate it. Hi, James. I'm a plasterer and I have a degree in statistics. Some customers do kind of assume I probably haven't got much of an education due to my career. I tell you what, good plasterers are as rare as hen's teeth, aren't they? So you've definitely made the right choice there. Statisticians, a tenner penny. One of the best ones was when a guy was looking down on me a bit throughout the day when I was working. Then his kid came home from college and couldn't do his maths homework. I was working in the same room and ended up talking him through it while the dad looked on sheepishly. He worked in finance. I like that. I got the, was it David who mentioned the D in physics that we both managed to secure? I actually got an E in statistics. I must have told you that before, but only because they made me do maths for an extra year. I got a B in my O-level a year early, but you weren't legally allowed to give it up. I hadn't worked that. I didn't realise that. I came back to school the following year, the next September, and they said, you've got to do an AO level now because we can't stop teaching you maths until you're 16. It's fair to say I didn't fully engage. Now, I don't know whether you've noticed, but every week there seems to be some form of right-wing conference. Some weeks there are more than one. There's been one this week. It's where Kemi Badenoch was wanging on about Western values being under threat, a sort of version of Liz Truss's claim that we've only got 10 years to save the West, but not really able to tell us from what. I asked the Mayor of London about it a little earlier this week, and we both sort of thought, I think she means Muslims. But of course she won't come out and say that yet. Maybe that's what Nigel Farage is talking about when he claims that there's no free speech or that free speech is under threat in this country. That one was in London, and then there's another one in America this week where Steve Bannon has given what appears to be a fascist salute and Liz Truss has said some words. I kind of found myself a little bit confused about the way that these things were reported. And always reported very seriously, as if there's some big symposium taking place, as if it's a great meeting of minds, when a lot of these people say, well, anyway, I don't want to put words into anybody's mouth. So Aggie Chambray made her way there to the ARC conference. What does it stand for, Aggie?
Alliance of Responsible Citizenship.
Oh, and this is Jordan Peterson's outfit.
This is Jordan Peterson's outfit, indeed.
The lobster man. And I just wanted to find out a little bit more about what happens at places like this.
Well, I'm genuinely disappointed to report, James, that there was nobody twirling a chainsaw on stage. So it is, by its very nature, a bit worse than the CPAC conference because, of course, Elon Musk went on stage earlier and was presented by the Argentine president with a chainsaw, and then he wandered around the stage with a chainsaw and sunglasses on. That didn't happen in London.
Do you know that's not even the maddest thing that's happened today?
What else has happened?
Jacob Rees-Mogg's daughter read Michael Gove's tarot cards live on television.
Wow.
More on that. More on that as it breaks. More on that as it comes in.
More on that as we get it. Well, anyway, it was in East London, this Alliance for Reliable Citizenship, much to the genuine horror of Douglas Murray, who got up on stage and lambasted East London and urged the international delegates to go a few miles down the road to see a beautiful historic city, because East London was not that. People there had paid between £450 to £1,500 to be there. And it was described as kind of cult-like. And the room, it was 3 times the size of last year. I had the pleasure of going last year as well. The room was kind of dark. The audience was very, very engaged. At one stage, there was one guy who got up on stage to sing a song that he'd written about the US government. He started off by saying, "We're all hurting. That's why we're all here. We realise it's time to do something." And then quite quickly, he brought out a guitar.
By God, if you're 5'3" and you're 300 pounds, taxes ought not to pay for a bag of fudge rounds. Young men are putting themselves 6 feet in the ground, 'cause all this damn country does is keep on kicking them down.
So it's a narrative of eternal victimhood from people who can afford 1,500 quid for a ticket and to fly here from the United States of America to whine about how they're penalised and victimised and discriminated against, while also claiming that they're... Anyway, sorry.
I think that was genuinely one of the themes. I was trying to work out, when I was thinking this morning about talking to you about this, what the things that kept coming up were. And it was their fear about net zero, their fear about the future of the West, the fear about Keir Starmer, fear about woke, mental health, assisted dying, or as it was referred to there, euthanasia. And you know, Kemi Badenoch, you've talked about it on the show this week, but she talked there. And I pointed out to somebody that very, very recently her party was in power. And they said, yeah, but it's completely different. It's completely different. They're also all very worried about birth rates, which, you know, we do know are declining globally. Nigel Farage got up on stage, called for a rise in birth rates.
He goes to all of them. Is he ever in Clacton?
Good question.
They need, listen, if you're in Clacton, you're worried about never seeing your MP, put on a very, very right-wing conference with decent fees for the speakers. He'll be there in a flash. There you go.
That's possibly true.
So he's telling people to have children.
He's telling, and so is the former president of Hungary, who actually asked people to stand up if they had more than 3 children. And when I was sitting, vox-popping people, speaking to people, just outside the hall, one person asked how many kids I had. I said, none, and he looked very disappointed, asked if I had a boyfriend, and I should have said none of your business. Anyway, I told him I was engaged, and he seemed very relieved by that information. But that was the kind of theme. Those were the conversations going on about in the hall.
So this is fear of foreigners, right? This is that people like you, and for the benefit of those of you who only know Aggie through the radio, white young women with blonde hair like you should be havhaving lots and lots of children.
More than 3,
because all of the brown people are having loads. I can't think what other explanation there could be for this.
Well, I suppose the only counter to it could be that they are just genuinely concerned about declining birth rates globally. But, you know, that was one of the things talked about. And we can hear a little clip, because I went around asking people why they're there, what the shared values they all kept on talking about were, and what had brought them all together.
In the Judeo-Christian values, which I guess you may be aware of, we all are commissioned by the Lord to love our neighbors and to honor the father and the mother, and to walk in a decent manner, to defend life from the very first ages, like conception, to the death. In the Judeo-Christian values, we feel an obligation to take a stand of defending our children from gender ideology and taking care of our homes, our families, and building a society that we can add value in it.
I think it is a broad church. I mean, I think the sort of common threads will be things like, probably a pro-capitalist sort of world in which there's a strong culture, strong identity of the nation, family. For a lot of people, faith is the center point of all of this.
I've talked a lot about how the West has somehow, with all its specializations, right, lost in that profession the connection between body and soul, and what is a human, what is life, what is health, and everything beyond the mere problematic, the symptom that we're seeing right now. And just, I don't like the word holistic, but getting the spiritual back in touch with the physical.
In the mainstream media, we are constantly told that the climate is such a catastrophe and that we literally have to drive this economy to this country into the tip to save the planet. And I kind of don't really feel like there is an alternative version of events, an alternative opinion that is allowed to be voiced elsewhere.
I suppose people would say that's because kind of scientists have said that kind of climate change is destroying.
The scientists also did consent that coronavirus didn't come out of Wuhan, whilst really later on it turns out that what the scientists were telling us were not actually the truth. So when we talk about the expert class, it really depends on which expert you talk about.
It's really nice to see like-minded people because I deeply support and share the values of this conference.
And what are the values of this conference?
We couldn't see them clearly written, but you can feel them in the lectures, in the people, in the conversations, and I believe these are the Christian values, the core Judeo-Christian values and the Western values.
Did you sign up? Did they manage to get you involved?
I don't think I have. I mean, I asked so many people, you heard a selection there, what those shared values were. And people kept just saying to me, Judeo-Christian values. Right. And I kept trying to understand.
What's the other Abrahamic religion that doesn't recognise Jesus as a Messiah? I think it begins with I. Can I put my finger to... So Judeo-Christian is an odd juxtaposition. It's sort of leaving one Abrahamic religion out of the equation entirely. But of course, only the Christians think that Christ was the Messiah. Islam. No one mentioned Islam. It's not the Judeo-Christian, Islamic or the Abrahamic values.
No, they didn't.
Same God.
No, and I was then told by a volunteer after I'd been interviewing for people for a little while that I was making people feel uncomfortable. But I didn't really understand why. Because I was...
Were you sort of moving their cushions, or you?
I was just simply asking if they'd mind having a chat with me.
What are your values?
LBC,
you know what our values, and you didn't, and they couldn't tell you, and that made them feel uncomfortable. Because this is the same thing that I'm getting increasingly drawn to. This idea that there's freedom of speech is under threat, but I can't tell you what it is that I'm not allowed to say. We're here to celebrate our Western values. What are these Western values that distinguish you from other people, and how are they under threat? This is real. I don't know if you've seen this. It's a big picture of Kemi Badenoch with the words, "We must defend it. Conservatives are the guardians of Western civilization." This has come from their Twitter account. "The West is in a crisis made by its own weakness. To save it, we must reject self-doubt." Self-doubt's really good. I have to say this. I think if anyone in the current political sphere would benefit from a little bit of self-doubt, it's probably Kemi Badenoch. If she could just develop a degree of self-doubt, she'd stop making such an almighty fool of herself at PMQs and elsewhere every week. To save it, we must reject self-doubt, defend free speech, there it is again, secure our borders and restore national pride. That's what Kemi Badenoch is here to do. So that's very much of a piece with what you witnessed this week.
But maybe I'm being obtuse, James, but I still don't understand what that means. What does that literally mean on a kind of policy platform? They were in charge 8 months ago. I simply don't think...
but only for 14 years.
You're right, sorry. Only for 14 years.
What is it? The West is in a crisis of its own a crisis made by its own weakness. Presumably that only started 8 months ago.
Well, apparently so. But it's strange, isn't it? And it feels like it's all very much in the shadow of Donald Trump. They talked about Donald Trump quite a lot at this conference too. And then you've got Nigel Farage kind of jetting off to CPAC conference as well, making sure he gets the most out of two right-wing conferences. But I think what I thought was interesting was there were people, I mentioned there was a retired teacher from Washington, D.C., who said to me, I don't agree with everything that's being said here. I'm kind of trying to sieve out what I do agree with, what I don't agree with. And there are obviously differing opinions, although a lot of them talked about the shared values, but they feel they can talk about them. They feel they can have people who are much more on the fringes than others and have these conversations. And it does feel like,
That's all we ever hear. I want to have a conversation about something else. The benefits of self-doubt. You mentioned a former president of Hungary. Was it Katalin Novak?
It was the very same, who resigned in disgrace.
So she's asking people how many children they've had and applauding them for having lots of children, but had to resign, I think, live on television after it emerged that she'd pardoned a man convicted of covering up a massive child sexual abuse case.
Yes.
So those are the sort of values.
Those are the sort of values. And what I thought was interesting, if this was a Conservative Party conference, I think, if this was a Labour Party conference and you had people like that speaking and you had, You have Nigel Farage, you have Kemi Badenoch, from two different parties. You have Douglas Murray, you have the guy who interviewed Kemi Badenoch 2 weeks ago and then interviewed Fraser Nelson, who's a former Spectator editor, last week, and had a conversation about whether or not Rishi Sunak
can't be English because he's
exactly
a Hindu.
If those people were speaking at Labour Party conference, I think that would be the entire story. The story being that there are people on the fringes being kind of let into the wings. And that doesn't happen. And I know that it's not a political party, but it is a conversation about the right. And no one blinked an eyelid. You had Michael Gove there, who's now the editor of The Spectator, but was, in the Tory fold, very close to Kemi Badenoch. But you had people who are not on the fringes of the right, who are not kind of on the extremes of the right. And then you had people that were all in this kind of melting pot in East London.
Legitimising, by turning up, really, the extremities, that what you might have called the previously respectable characters. And it is extraordinary how often The Spectator pops up in these sort of spaces. Aggie Chambray, thank you. So that's 2 years going for the hat trick next year?
Absolutely.
What's the next one? What happened to the Nat Cons? Are they still going? The National Conservatives?
Pretty sure.
Because I tell you what, for people whose freedoms are being eroded, it's extraordinary how many massive international conferences they managed to have. And Nigel is at the one in America at the moment where Steve Bannon gave what appeared to be a fascist salute.
The very same.
God, imagine what they'd be doing if their freedoms weren't being suppressed and eroded in such an egregious fashion. Thank you, Aggie. It's 12:47.
James O'Brien on LBC.
50 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I just find it fascinating. We're going to be talking about it a lot more. That's the leader of the actual opposition, claiming that the West is in a crisis because of weakness, and I don't know that anybody's got the first idea what she's on about. And then you turn up at one of these conferences, as Aggie did, and you ask people to explain what it is we're supposed to be frightened of, or what exactly is under threat. And what exactly is it you're not allowed to say? And then she gets collared by one of the organisers for making people feel uncomfortable. Just think about that for a minute. What are we here to do? Celebrate free speech. What are we going to do with that person over there asking questions about why we're here? Tell her she's making everyone uncomfortable and to stop. But we're here to celebrate not that speech, the free speech. Well, what things can't you say that you want to say? The free stuff. What stuff? Give me an example. I can't think of any examples. Why are you always asking for examples? It's like Brexit all over again. Why do I have to come up with an example? Why can't I just feel angry about something without having to tell you exactly what it is? And stop pushing me to say brown people, because that's what we both know I mean. That was my little roundup of what happened at at every single one of these conferences that Nigel Farage seems to attend on an almost religious basis. And speaking of religious, Judeo-Christian values, but not the other sort, not the other religion that has its roots in Abrahamic theology. No, the Judeo-Christian ones. There you go. 12:51 is the time. I want to play you something. It involves Boris Johnson. Don't hate me. It just, I think, is a timely reminder of why having Keir Starmer in Downing Street at the time of peril in Ukraine with regard to Donald Trump is something for which we should probably feel a modicum of relief. Because Johnson, on the subject of modern warfare and Ukraine, this is back, it's only 2-3 years ago, 3 years almost to the day actually, the liaison committee, The war broke out 3 years almost to the day, forgive me. This is Tobias Ellwood talking to Boris Johnson about defence cuts. So remember, Johnson, integral member of several Tory administrations that have hollowed out our military capabilities, starting with David Cameron, following right through to Rishi Sunak. Johnson, foreign secretary in one administration, prime minister in another. We're always in the heart of it. And this is his understanding of, if you want to understand how anyone could have allowed this to happen, this is a really helpful guide. And once again, Tobias Ellwood, like Ben Wallace, reminds us what decent Conservatives sound like.
If you're saying, Mr. Ellwood, that you think we should go back and prepare for tank battles in
No, you're putting words into my mouth.
I don't know but you're saying that you mentioned.
But you mentioned tanks.
On the European
we
border.
Are cutting back on our tanks. What is amassing on the Russian border right now, on the Ukrainian border? It's tanks, arguably enough. But that's besides the point. I'm saying step back, look at the wider security picture, look at our defence posture, and see what needs to be done.
If you think that UK tanks are the answer, then
no. Now you're going down an avenue.
You're saying that we should commit UK tanks to the defence of
Ukraine.
No.
You deliberately. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry you're taking us down this rabbit hole, because you know perfectly well it's not about tanks.
I'm not taking you down a rabbit hole.
Tanks are one element of a wide spectrum of our defence capability.
You brought up tanks, Mr. Oldham.
Tanks.
You brought up
aircraft. 48 aircraft, F-35s. You promised 138. You've cut back to 48. You cut back on not just tanks. Warriors have been removed completely. Hercules aircraft removed completely. And then 10,000 troopers have been removed. So we can talk about tanks, or we can talk about the wider spectrum of capabilities that have been reduced. At the very time I'm trying to make clear that there are bigger threats coming over the horizon.
Yes,
Prime Minister.
And I think what I'm trying to make clear is I think that it's now or never for the UK armed forces. We have to recognise that the old concepts of fighting big tank battles on the European landmass, which I think is what you're driving at, are over, and there are other better things that we should be investing in the FCAS, in the Future Combat Air System, in cyber. This is how warfare of the future is going to be fought in our advanced early warning systems, and that is where we need to be. I think that the investments that we are making,
you can't hold ground with cyber.
In new technology are absolutely indispensable to our ability to fight the wars of the 21st century. And I don't think that going back to a 1940s style approach will serve us well.
Boris Johnson there, just a few months before the outbreak of war in Ukraine, explaining how we would never see the type of war that is currently still being fought in Ukraine. I just thought it was worth reminding us of that because, it's good to know that people like Tobias Ellwood and Ben Wallace exist, and it's important to remember just how low we were brought by the likes of Boris Johnson. Much lighter note now. Apologies to Pashley and Peter and Brian and Billy and Jim. I've kind of run away with the show a bit, but I want to play you a little clip of this week's Full Disclosure with the comedian Zoe Lyons, lovely woman, brilliant comic, and a really nice interviewee.
That was a big bond with my dad and I, Dick Emery. In fact, that is my first comedy memory. I must have been 5 years old. And every night before I went to bed, my dad would stand me on the end of the bed, and I'd say, "Do the line," and he'd go, "Oh, you are awful," and then hit me, so I'd fall back on the bed, and then go, "But I like you," and that was my bedtime story.
That's lovely.
Yeah,
there's something about at 5 is young, but when you feel that you appreciate the things the grown-ups find funny, it's quite a lovely moment, isn't it? It was Morecambe and Wise as well, probably for me. You just sort of think, so you're upstairs, you hear your dad laughing, and then a couple of years later you're downstairs watching it with them and wondering what they're laughing at.
That is a huge moment.
And then that moment when you get it and you laugh as well.
Yeah.
So you had a relationship with comedy, emotionally.
Oh yeah. We still share clips, my dad and I. The particularly the Peter Sellers from the Pink Panther, does your dog bite? No, my dog does not bite. It's one of the funniest scenes ever. It makes him howl. He does have a very innocent, childish sense of humour, but so do I.
Yeah?
Yeah.
But nothing yet to suggest that you might have a go at it yourself one day.
No, except... and even at university with the sort of amateur dramatic society, I was predominantly making props initially.
Oh, were you?
Yeah, because York was quite... I didn't realise this, but it did have quite a high sort of Oxbridge reject sort of clientele.
Yeah, okay.
So I had gone from this high school in Glasgow to this semi-posh uni, and I hadn't been around people like that before. So
people
I was
me.
You were a bit intimidated, yeah.
And they were intimidated by people like you.
Yeah, probably.
But they were just better at hiding it.
Yeah. They just sounded less intimidated.
Yes, exactly. It costs a fortune having that patina of not being intimidated. So you didn't think that you would push yourself onto the stage, but you wanted to be involved, so you started...
I'm making the props.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I got involved in sketch shows, and then...
Well, that's comedy.
Yeah,
okay. Characters.
And then I got like little parts in plays. I was always the shuffling maid until I got to play. There was a lovely woman who directed. She was doing English. I was always really intimidated by people doing English. Again, I think that came back to the sort of reading thing and the sort of feeling inadequate. And she cast me as Maggie in Brian Friel's Dancing at Lunacy. And it's a really big part, and it's a lovely part.
It is.
And I came alive in that moment. Oh, God, I loved it. I loved it because I knew I could do it.
Again, like going to Marrakesh, like a proper life-changing.
Yeah. Also, I could do the Irish accent. Get in. So, yeah.
Did you smash it?
I think I did.
Then you did.
Yeah, I think I did. Yeah, it was a long time ago, but I do remember thinking, oh, yeah, I've nailed this.
They're reviving it at the Abbey Theatre in Dublin this year.
It's beautiful.
It's an incredible play, isn't it?
Yeah.
It really is. And so did that change your ambitions? Did you begin to think cautiously, maybe I could even think?
Yeah.
Right.
But again, it always takes me ages. My mental state and career has moved like an arthritic snail.
Well,
it's
slowly, catching
slowly.
You'll enjoy that, seriously. It's very funny. Not my bits. My bits are rubbish, but her bits are great. Zoe Lyons, this week's guest on Full Disclosure. And if you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio, as well as listen to a dizzying range of podcasts, including the new one, James O'Brien Daily, the best bits of this show in a 60-minute package every day. Download now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now it's Sheila Fogarty.
Every time you read that, I'm
not reading it. I'm doing it all off the top of my head. How dare you? What are you talking about?
He reads it. I can see you as the salesman that you once were.
The suit salesman. Yeah. Oh, you look lovely.
Suits you, sir.
Suits you, sir. Oh, suits you, sir.
Global Player.
I love that job.
You, sir.
I miss that. I'll probably go back to that when I retire. Open a little shop in Covent Garden.
James O'Brien on LBC.